High noon at Buckingham Palace. The crowd gasped as Karen Miller raised her hidden stun gun toward the royal guard's back. She thought attacking a toy soldier would make her famous. 3 seconds later, her body hit the cobblestones as Sergeant James Blake moved with lethal precision. Below his ceremonial bearskin cap lay 20 years of SAS close combat training. The tourists never saw the combat knife she'd dropped or the terrorist cell tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow I've got something really special for you. And now, back to the video. High noon at Buckingham Palace. The crowd gasped as Karen Miller raised her hidden stun gun toward the royal guard's back. She thought attacking a toy soldier would make her famous. 3 seconds later, her body hit the cobblestones as Sergeant James Blake moved with lethal precision. Below his ceremonial bearskin cap lay 20 years of SAS close combat training. The tourists never saw the combat knife she'd dropped or the terrorist cell tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve. The crowd scattered in panic, smartphones raised to capture the unprecedented scene. Children cried as parents pulled them away from the unfolding chaos. Foreign visitors froze in disbelief. This wasn't the dignified changing of the guard ceremony they'd expected to witness outside the Queen's residence. Sergeant Blake stood over Karen's unconscious form, his face an impenetrable mask of discipline. His eyes, however, scanned the crowd with military precision, searching for potential accomplices. 20 years in special operations had taught him that lone wolves were rare, especially ones carrying modified military-grade weapons and combat knives. The distinctive wail of Metropolitan Police sirens grew closer. 2 plainclothes security officers emerged from the crowd, moving with the purposeful efficiency of professionals. They'd been monitoring the ceremony, a standard precaution for high-profile tourist destinations in an era of heightened security. Threats. "Secure the weapon," the senior officer ordered, nodding toward the stun gun that had skittered across the cobblestones. His partner carefully collected it, noting the unusual modifications. "This isn't standard civilian issue," he muttered, examining the device. "Military grade, twice the normal voltage." Blake maintained his position, one knee still firmly planted on Karen's back, her arms now secured behind her with tactical restraints. His ceremonial uniform was a stark contrast to the modern security response unfolding around him, yet nobody questioned his authority over the situation. "She was going to use that on you?" the senior plainclothes officer asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer but was confirming for the official record. "Affirmative," Blake responded, his voice calm despite having narrowly avoided an assault that could have incapacitated or killed him. She approached from the crowd, weapon concealed until the final moment. What Blake didn't mention was the split-second calculation he'd made. The weight distribution that told him she carried more than just the stun gun. The micro-expression that revealed lethal intent rather than misguided protest. The tactical positioning that suggested professional training rather than tourist stupidity. A police response unit arrived, officers establishing a perimeter as medical personnel attended to Karen, who was beginning to regain consciousness. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening with recognition, and something else. Not fear, as might be expected from someone in her position. Something closer to cold calculation. "American passport," announced one officer, examining the identification from her pocket. Karen Miller, 34, from Minneapolis. Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. The woman's unconscious movements had suggested military or specialized training, not consistent with the tourist identity her passport proclaimed. And then there was the tattoo he'd glimpsed when her sleeve had ridden up during the takedown, a distinctive design he'd seen before in circumstances far removed from London tourism. As Karen was loaded into a police transport, Blake exchanged a significant glance with the senior plainclothes officer. No words were needed between professionals who recognized the hallmarks of something more complex than a simple attack. The crowd was being efficiently dispersed, the changing of the guard ceremony officially suspended for the day. Yet even as he was directed to return to his post, Blake noticed a man observing from the periphery, too calm, too focused, too interested in the police response rather than the spectacle itself. When their eyes briefly met, the man turned unhurriedly and disappeared into the dispersing crowd. Blake filed the face away in his memory. 20 years of special operations had taught him another important lesson. Coincidences rarely existed in situations like this. As the square returned to an uneasy normalcy, the true significance of what had just occurred remained hidden from the tourists who were already posting shaky videos of the incident online. They didn't realize they had witnessed not just an attack on a ceremonial guard, but the opening move in a game with stakes far higher than anyone in that square could imagine. Except, perhaps, for Sergeant James Blake, who resumed his post with ceremonial precision while his mind processed the implications of what had just happened and what might come next. The Dorchester Hotel stood as a testament to London's enduring luxury, its Art Deco elegance having hosted royalty, celebrities, and the global elite since the 1930s. In room 718, Karen Miller stood before the bathroom mirror, studying the face that looked back at her, a face that wasn't entirely her own. The blonde wig sat perfectly, expertly crafted and applied with professional adhesive. Green contact lenses masked her natural hazel eyes. Her normally sharp features had been softened with subtle prosthetics along her jawline. The transformation was comprehensive and meticulous, the work of someone who understood that true disguise went far beyond simple costume. Rebecca Thompson, she whispered to herself, testing the name that matched the passport in her luggage. The accent was flawless Midwestern American, Minnesota nice with just a hint of the nasal quality particular to Minneapolis. Elementary. School teacher, first time in London, so excited to see Buckingham Palace. A soft knock on the bathroom door interrupted her rehearsal. Karen, now Rebecca, opened it to reveal Marcus Headley, tall and imposing in a tailored charcoal suit that complemented his salt and pepper hair. His bearing screamed military despite the civilian attire. Some habits couldn't be disguised by expensive clothing. Still practicing? He asked, his British accent carrying the polished edges of expensive education. You've been at it for 3 years. I'd say you've mastered it by now. Character immersion is never complete, she replied, stepping past him into the hotel room's spacious main area. You taught me that. Marcus nodded, with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had absorbed the lesson well. Indeed, and you've proven an exceptional student. He moved to the window, looking out over London's skyline with practiced casualness, that nonetheless included a security sweep of visible approaches to their location. Our package should be arriving within the hour. Rebecca nodded, understanding the significance. The package contained the necessary equipment for the operation, the final pieces needed to execute a plan that had been in development for months. She felt the familiar flutter of anticipation in her stomach, not quite nervousness, but the heightened awareness that came before significant action. I'll collect it from the concierge when it arrives, she said, reaching for the hotel room keycard. Marcus's hand caught her wrist, the movement swift but not aggressive. Remember, I know, she interrupted, a flash of irritation crossing her features. Enthusiastic American tourist. Chat about landmarks. Express appropriate excitement about British tea and the Queen. His grip relaxed, a slight smile softening his features. Of course you know. Thorough as always. It was a peace offering of sorts, and Rebecca accepted it with a nod. 3 years of working together had created a complex relationship, mentor and student, handler and operative, partners in a cause that had consumed them both. The boundaries sometimes blurred, creating moments of tension that required careful navigation. Once alone in the corridor, Rebecca adjusted her posture and expression, shedding the focused intensity of the operative and adopting the wide-eyed enthusiasm of the American tourist. By the time the elevator doors opened onto the opulent lobby, the transformation was complete. Rebecca Thompson walked with the slightly uncertain confidence of someone in unfamiliar but exciting surroundings, her movements lacking the economical precision that characterized Karen Miller's usual demeanor. Good afternoon, she greeted the concierge, her Midwestern accent perfect and her smile genuine seeming. I believe there might be a package for me. Rebecca Thompson, room 718. The young man behind the desk returned her smile with professional warmth. Of course, Ms. Thompson. 1 moment, please. He disappeared into a back room, returning moments later with a medium-sized box wrapped in brown paper. Here you are. Will you need assistance taking it to your room? Oh gosh, no, I can manage, Rebecca replied with a self-deprecating laugh. I'm a teacher. I'm used to hauling around supplies heavier than this. Say, while I've got you, can you Recommend the best time to see the changing of the guard. I want to get a good spot for photos. The conversation continued for several minutes, Rebecca asking the expected tourist questions while the concierge provided practiced answers. It was a perfect exchange, unremarkable, forgettable, exactly as it should be. Back in the room, Marcus locked the door behind her as she placed the package on the king-sized bed. His expression changed subtly, shifting from the urbane hotel guest to the focused operative with a mission to complete. "Any complications?" he asked, already reaching for a small case that contained specialized tools for opening packages without damaging contents. About Rebecca Thompson, elementary school teacher from Minneapolis. "As it should be," Marcus acknowledged, revealing a nondescript cardboard box beneath the brown paper. "The most effective covers are the ones that generate neither interest nor suspicion." The cardboard yielded to his careful handling, revealing precisely arranged contents nestled in form-fitting foam. A modified stun gun with twice the standard voltage, a combat knife of military design and quality, communications equipment disguised as standard tourist electronics, and a small makeup kit for final disguise adjustments. Marcus lifted the stun gun first, examining it with professional appreciation. "German engineering with custom modifications, 2 million volts, enough to incapacitate even through the thick wool of a guard's uniform." Rebecca took it from him, testing its weight and balance. The weapon felt substantial despite its compact design, a serious tool rather than the civilian defense devices sold in shopping malls and online stores. "Effective range, direct contact preferred, but it will arc through 2 inches if necessary," Marcus explained, moving on to examine the knife. "This is standard issue for certain special operations units, Fairbairn-Sykes design, updated for modern materials. Perfect balance, minimal reflective surfaces." "None whatsoever," Rebecca replied, watching as he carefully cut through the wrapping. London seems remarkably unconcerned. Rebecca watched as he continued the equipment check, a part of her mind still marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From dedicated CIA analyst to disillusioned whistleblower to recruited operative for an organization with no name but considerable resources and a revolutionary agenda. Yemen had been the breaking point. She had gone there believing in her mission, in the agency, in the entire apparatus of American intelligence. She had left with blood on her hands and disillusionment in her heart, haunted by decisions made in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away that had cost innocent lives on the ground. Marcus had found her afterward, approaching her in a Geneva cafe where she had been hiding while considering her limited options. He had spoken of systemic corruption, of intelligence agencies serving political masters rather than truth or justice, of a world where power operated unchecked behind the facade of democratic institutions. He had offered her not just escape from her immediate problems, but purpose, a chance to fight against the system she had come to see as fundamentally flawed. 3 years later, that purpose had brought her to London, to the Dorchester, to this moment of final preparation before a mission that would, according to Marcus, set in motion events that will reshape the political landscape of Europe. "You're thinking about Yemen again," Marcus observed, interrupting her thoughts with uncanny perception. Rebecca met his gaze directly. "How could you tell?" "Your left hand," he replied, nodding toward where her fingers had unconsciously formed a loose fist. "You always do that when those memories surface." A physical manifestation of emotional armor. She consciously relaxed her hand, surprised as always by his ability to read micro-expressions and physical tells. "Just reminding myself why we're doing this." Marcus nodded, his expression softening slightly. "A necessary reminder for all of us. The personal cost that brought us to this cause." He returned to the equipment, all business again. The communication device is disguised as a standard tourist cell phone. European frequencies, encrypted transmission capabilities, completely untraceable when used according to protocol. The briefing continued, Marcus covering each piece of equipment with the thoroughness that had characterized all their operational planning. Rebecca absorbed the technical details, while a part of her mind continued its own assessment of Marcus, of the mission, of her own readiness for what was to come. By evening, the equipment had been checked, double-checked, and securely stored within their hotel room. Rebecca sat by the window, watching as London's lights came on against the gathering dusk. The city spread before her, magnificent and oblivious, its people going about their lives unaware of what she and others like her were planning. "Penny for your thoughts," Marcus said, offering her a glass of single malt whiskey as he joined her by the window. Rebecca accepted the glass, taking a small sip before answering. "I was thinking about impact radiuses." "Unusual contemplation for the evening before an operation," he remarked, settling into the chair opposite hers. "Not really," she countered. "Every operation has an impact radius, the circle of effect that spreads outward from the point of action, like a stone thrown into water. I was just considering the ripples we're about to create." Marcus studied her over the rim of his glass. "Philosophical tonight." "Practical," she corrected. "Understanding consequences is practical." He nodded, conceding the point. "And what consequences are you contemplating specifically?" Rebecca gestured toward the city beyond the window. "All those people out there, going about their lives, making dinner, watching television, arguing with their partners, kissing their children goodnight. None of them know that tomorrow their perception of safety, of the world they live in, will be fundamentally altered. For the better," Marcus added, his voice carrying the conviction that had drawn her to his cause 3 years earlier. "Sometimes, systems must be shocked before they can be reformed. People must be awakened to the vulnerabilities of institutions they've been taught to trust implicitly." Rebecca nodded, having heard variations of this philosophy throughout her training. She believed it, believed that comfortable citizens needed to understand the fragility of the systems they took for granted, and yet something about tomorrow's specific operation left her with questions she couldn't quite articulate. "You're concerned about the target," Marcus observed, again demonstrating his uncanny ability to read her thoughts. "Sergeant Blake," she confirmed. "Decorated soldier, distinguished service record, 20 years serving his country. Not exactly the corrupt power broker our operations usually focus on." Marcus set his glass down, leaning forward with the intensity that emerged whenever he discussed the philosophical underpinnings of their cause. "Blake represents something more significant than his individual identity. He's a symbol of state, power projected through ceremony, the perfect integration of military force and monarchical tradition. By demonstrating his vulnerability, we expose the fragility behind the facade of ceremonial invulnerability." "A palace guard with a bearskin hat as a philosophical statement," Rebecca mused, not entirely convinced. "Precisely," Marcus insisted. "And the location, Buckingham Palace itself, the heart of British ceremonial power, creates the perfect symbolic context. The image of a royal guard neutralized on those very grounds sends a message that will resonate far beyond the immediate event." Rebecca nodded, accepting the explanation while still processing her own reservations. She had participated in operations against corrupt officials, intelligence operatives who abused their power, corporate executives who manipulated markets and governments alike. Sergeant Blake seemed a different category of target altogether. "And the timing?" she asked, shifting to more concrete operational concerns. "Why now specifically?" "Multiple factors aligning," Marcus explained, apparently satisfied that he had addressed her philosophical concerns. "Blake's position during tomorrow's ceremony places him precisely where we need him to be. Security patterns have established consistent vulnerabilities that we can exploit, and most importantly, the European Security Conference begins in Brussels the day after tomorrow, ensuring maximum media attention and political sensitivity to any security incident." The explanation made tactical sense, fitting the operational methodology she had come to expect from Marcus's planning. Every action carefully calculated for maximum impact, timing coordinated with broader events to amplify effect, symbolism considered as carefully as practical execution. "The support team is in position?" she asked, returning her focus to operational details. "Everything is in place," Marcus assured her. "Your role is focused and limited. Create the incident, allow the response, maintain your cover identity through processing. The extraction team will handle the rest." Rebecca nodded, understanding her part in the larger operation. She would be the visible element, the American tourist who attacked a royal guard, while other operatives used the resulting distraction and security response to access sensitive areas normally impenetrable to unauthorized personnel. "And my Extraction timeline? She asked, moving on to her own security considerations. Standard protocol, Marcus replied. Maintain cover through initial processing. If detained beyond 24 hours, the extraction team activates contingency measures. We've established sufficient background for your cover identity to withstand preliminary investigation. Mental health issues, obsessive interest in British royalty, history of minor confrontations with authority figures, enough to make your actions seem like those of a disturbed individual rather than a trained operative. It was a solid cover, Rebecca had to admit. The organization never cut corners on operational security or extraction planning. 3 years of successful missions had demonstrated their capabilities in even the most challenging circumstances. Get some rest, Marcus advised, rising from his chair. Tomorrow will demand your absolute focus. After he retired to his room, the suite was expansive, with separate bedrooms providing both privacy and operational security through multiple, i.e., potential exit points. Rebecca remained by the window a while longer, watching the city and considering the man who had become the center of her professional existence over the past 3 years. Marcus Headley, former British military intelligence officer, according to the limited personal background he had shared. A man of precise habits and expansive philosophical vision. Tactically brilliant, strategically patient, personally reserved, yet capable of moments of surprising empathy. He had recruited her, trained her, shaped her into the operative she had become, all while maintaining a careful professional distance that occasionally gave way to something more personal, but never fully intimate. She trusted him with her life, had done so on multiple operations, and yet there remained aspects of both the man and the organization he represented that remained opaque to her. The ultimate objectives, the leadership structure beyond Marcus himself, the sources of their considerable funding and resources, all existed in a realm of strategic ambiguity that she had come to accept as necessary for operational security. Tomorrow would be her most significant mission yet. Not necessarily the most complex tactically, but certainly the highest profile in terms of potential media coverage and political impact. The thought should have made her anxious, but instead she felt a curious calm. The result of thorough preparation and absolute clarity of purpose, or almost absolute clarity, she amended, as her thoughts returned briefly to Sergeant Blake and her earlier reservations. She pushed those thoughts aside with practiced discipline. The mission was what mattered now, not philosophical questions about symbolic targets or impact radiuses. Sleep came easily when she finally sought it, her mind settling into the focused calm that preceded operational deployment. Tomorrow would unfold according to plan, as their missions always did under Marcus's guidance. Her role was clear, her preparation complete, her commitment unwavering. If dreams came during those hours of rest, they left no impression by morning. Next day dawned grey and drizzling, typical London weather that suited their purposes perfectly. Rain meant raincoats and umbrellas, additional cover for equipment and actions. Fewer tourists crowding the palace grounds, though still enough to provide the necessary audience and camouflage. Rebecca dressed with careful attention to her cover. Identity, comfortable walking shoes, practical raincoat over tourist-appropriate clothing, a small backpack containing guidebooks, water bottle, and smartphone. The stun gun was concealed in a specially designed pocket within the raincoat, accessible with a practiced movement but invisible to casual observation. The knife was secured at her lower back, similarly concealed, but available if needed. Marcus conducted a final equipment check while Rebecca completed her preparation, his movements precise and methodical. They had worked together long enough that the process required minimal communication, each understanding their role and responsibilities without need for discussion. "You'll depart first," Marcus instructed as they completed the final preparations. "I'll follow 30 minutes later. We maintain operational separation until extraction phase. No acknowledgement if we encounter each other during deployment." Rebecca nodded, understanding the security protocol. If one operative was compromised, the other would remain unassociated and able to implement contingency measures. "The primary surveillance point will be established on the southwest corner," Marcus continued, indicating the position on a detailed map of the palace grounds. "Secondary observation from the tourist viewing area near the Victoria Memorial. Both will maintain communication silence unless emergency protocols are required." Again, Rebecca nodded, absorbing the information while completing her own mental preparation. The plan was solid, the team experienced, the objective clear. Whatever philosophical reservations she might have harbored the previous evening had been set aside, replaced by the focused determination that characterized her operational mindset. "Good hunting," Marcus said simply as she prepared to depart, the same phrase he had used before each of their operations together. A tradition of sorts, carrying the weight of shared experience and mutual trust. "Clean extraction," she replied, completing their customary exchange with the outcome they both prioritized above all else. The journey from the Dorchester to Buckingham Palace took Rebecca through the heart of London, a route she navigated with the slightly uncertain efficiency of a tourist consulting maps and occasionally stopping to confirm directions. Throughout, she maintained constant situational awareness, identifying surveillance cameras, security personnel, police presence, and civilian patterns with practiced observation skills that never betrayed her cover identity. By 11:15 a.m., she had reached the palace grounds, joining the gathering crowd, anticipating the changing of the guard ceremony scheduled for noon. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, umbrellas lowered to improve viewing opportunities, creating better visibility for both tourists and Rebecca's own observations. She positioned herself carefully, close enough to the ceremonial route to have clear access to her target, far enough from obvious security positions to avoid heightened scrutiny, surrounded by other tourists who would provide both cover and distraction when the moment came. The waiting time provided opportunity for final mental preparation. Rebecca reviewed the approach vector, the precise timing required, the movement sequence that would bring her into position behind Sergeant Blake at exactly the right moment. She visualized the action and immediate aftermath, the security response, the behavioral patterns she would need to maintain through processing and potential interrogation. At precisely 11:45, the ceremony began, guards marching with ceremonial precision, the band playing traditional military music, tourists raising phones and cameras to capture the spectacle. Rebecca identified Sergeant Blake immediately, tall even without the bearskin cap that added to his impressive height, his bearing distinguished by a subtle quality of heightened awareness that separated the genuinely vigilant from those merely performing ceremony. She began her movement through the crowd, unhurried, using natural gaps and flows, maintaining the appearance of a tourist seeking a better view, while actually executing a carefully planned approach to her target position. No one paid her any particular attention, just another American visitor trying to capture the perfect photo of a quintessentially British tradition. As noon approached, Rebecca reached her designated position, within striking distance of where Blake would stand during a precisely timed portion of the ceremony. Her hand slipped into the raincoat pocket, fingers wrapping around the stun gun with practiced familiarity. Her breathing remained steady, her outward appearance calm and focused solely on the ceremonial display. The final moments ticked down, guards in position, ceremony reaching its culmination, security attention distributed across multiple points rather than focused on any single potential threat. Rebecca checked her position relative to Blake one final time, confirmed her exit route, and prepared for the action that would transform a ceremonial display into an international security incident. 3 minutes to execution. 2. 1. The moment arrived. Rebecca moved. Her approach was perfect, smooth, direct, with no hesitation to trigger security attention. The tourists around her remained focused on the ceremony rather than her movement. The stun gun came free from its concealed pocket with practiced efficiency, her finger finding the activation switch as she closed the final distance to Sergeant Blake's exposed back. In that final second before contact, a curious thought flashed through her mind. A fragment of her conversation with Marcus the previous evening about impact radiuses and ripple effects. Then training took over, eliminating all extraneous thought as she pressed forward to complete her mission. The stun gun hummed to life, electricity crackling between its contact points as Rebecca thrust it toward the vulnerable gap between Blake's collar and helmet. And everything changed. Blake moved, a motion so swift and precise it seemed impossible for someone who had been standing motionless moments before. His left arm swept outward in a defensive arc that deflected Rebecca's attacking hand, while his right simultaneously clamped around her wrist with crushing force. The stun gun discharged harmlessly into the air with a crack that sent nearby tourists scrambling backward in panic. Before Rebecca could process what was happening, Blake executed a perfect tactical throw, using her own momentum against her. For a heart-stopping moment she was airborne, then impact. Hard cobblestones driving the air from her lungs as Blake maintained control of her arm in a joint lock that prevented any further aggression. Training asserted itself through the shock of the failed attack. Rebecca reached for the knife at her lower back with her free hand, a movement born of operational reflex rather than conscious decision. Blake's boot pressed firmly against her wrist before her fingers could close around the handle, immobilizing her completely. "Don't," he said simply, his voice carrying absolute authority despite its conversational volume. Around them, chaos erupted. Tourists fleeing, security personnel responding, police whistles shrilling in the distance. Blake maintained his hold with the calm efficiency of someone for whom this type of situation was not unprecedented, his ceremonial uniform incongruous with the lethal effectiveness of his combat response. "Pulse 4, securing hostile." He spoke into what must have been a concealed radio. "Sergeant Major Wesson, I need a perimeter established." Rebecca struggled against his hold, testing his control while assessing options that were rapidly diminishing. Blake increased pressure just enough to send a clear message. Resistance would be met with precisely calibrated force sufficient to maintain control without causing unnecessary injury. "The knife," he said quietly, for her ears only. "Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, not standard tourist equipment." "I'm an American citizen," Rebecca gasped, instinctively falling back on her cover identity despite the catastrophic failure of her mission. "You have no right." "Save it," Blake cut her off. "The stun gun has military modifications, the knife is special forces issue, and that tattoo—" His eyes flicked to where her sleeve had ridden up during the takedown, revealing the small distinctive mark she kept concealed. "I've seen it before. Helmand Province, 2011. The observation sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the cold cobblestones beneath her. The tattoo was an identification marker used within the organization, small enough to be easily concealed, distinctive enough to be recognized by other operatives if necessary. That Blake recognized it from Afghanistan suggested a history far more complex than his current ceremonial role implied. 2 more royal guards had arrived, moving with the same lethal efficiency as Blake. One secured the stun gun, while the other took position to control the perimeter, his ceremonial rifle now held as the functional weapon it actually was beneath its ceremonial appearance. "Clear the area," came an authoritative command as plainclothes security personnel arrived, followed closely by Metropolitan Police officers. "Everyone move back!" Blake leaned closer to Rebecca, maintaining the joint lock while speaking directly to her ear. "3 of your associates tried to kill my unit in Helmand," he said, his voice still conversational but carrying an edge of steel. "They're buried there. Want to tell me what was worth trying again today?" The revelation staggered Rebecca. None of her briefings had suggested Blake had combat experience against the organization, let alone direct encounters in Afghanistan. Her mission planning had been based on the understanding that he was a ceremonial guard nearing retirement, selected as a target precisely because of his symbolic value rather than any operational significance. As police officers reached them and took control of her restraint, Rebecca's mind raced through the implications. Either the intelligence she had been provided was catastrophically flawed, or, a more disturbing possibility began to form, she had been deliberately sent into a compromised operation. The realization must have shone in her eyes because Blake's expression changed subtly, recognition of something beyond the failed attack and its immediate consequences. "Interesting," he murmured as the police secured her with handcuffs and began the process of taking her into custody. "Not quite what you expected, was it?" Rebecca maintained silence as she was led away, operational security protocols asserting themselves despite the shock of failure and potential betrayal. The crowd parted before the police escort, some still filming with their phones, others staring with the fascinated horror of tourists witnessing something far more real than the ceremonial pageantry they had come to see. As they reached the police transport vehicle, Rebecca risked a final glance back toward the palace grounds. Blake had already resumed his ceremonial position, bearskin cap perfectly straight, posture immaculate, as if nothing had disrupted the day's proceedings. Only his eyes moved, following her progress with the focused attention of a predator tracking potential threat. In that moment, despite her training and operational experience, Rebecca felt a chill of genuine fear. Not of arrest or interrogation, those were anticipated risks in her line of work, but of the dawning realization that the mission, the organization, and perhaps even Marcus himself represented something very different from what she had believed for the past 3 years. As the police van doors closed behind her, Rebecca steeled herself for what was to come. Whatever game was actually being played here, she had clearly been deployed as a piece rather than a player, and the board was far larger and more complex than she had been led to believe. Inside the police transport vehicle, Rebecca sat in enforced stillness, her mind working furiously despite her composed exterior. 2 officers sat opposite her, watchful but maintaining professional distance. They had been trained not to engage with suspects during initial transport. No questions, no conversation that might compromise subsequent formal interrogation. This suited Rebecca perfectly, giving her precious minutes to assess her situation and formulate response strategies. The first and most pressing question: had Marcus known? Had he deliberately sent her into an operation that was compromised from the start? Blake's recognition of the organization's tattoo and his reference to Helmand Province suggested either catastrophic intelligence failure or deliberate deception. Neither possibility aligned with Marcus's usual operational precision. The van moved through London traffic with unhurried efficiency, its route deliberately indirect, standard protocol to prevent anyone tracking their destination or attempting interception. Through the small windows, Rebecca caught fragmented glimpses of the city, now transformed in her perception from operational theater to hostile territory. Her training asserted itself, systematic and methodical, despite the disorientation of capture. Assess assets, minimal. Her weapons were confiscated, communication devices seized, cover identity compromised. Assess environment, controlled. Police transport with at least 2 officers, unknown destination, but likely a specialized facility, given the high-profile nature of the incident. Assess options, limited but not non-existent. Cover identity background included mental health components that might be leveraged, extraction protocols would activate if she were held beyond 24 hours, and she retained her most important asset: her trained mind and ability to adapt. The van eventually turned into an underground parking facility, descending a ramp that cut off the limited exterior visibility she had maintained. When the vehicle stopped and the rear doors opened, Rebecca found herself in what appeared to be a secure receiving area: concrete walls, controlled access points, surveillance cameras positioned for complete coverage. 4 additional officers waited, their positioning and alertness suggesting specialized security training rather than standard police procedure. "Out," one of them instructed tersely. Slowly, Rebecca complied, maintaining the slightly dazed demeanor appropriate to her cover identity while actually conducting detailed environmental assessment. The facility didn't match standard Metropolitan Police architecture or security protocols. This was something more specialized, likely counter-terrorism or intelligence-related. She was escorted through a series of security checkpoints, each more restrictive than the last, eventually arriving at a processing area where her restraints were temporarily removed for fingerprinting, photographs, and the collection of personal effects. Throughout, she maintained the confused, increasingly agitated behavior of Rebecca Thompson, demanding contact with the American embassy, expressing bewilderment at her treatment, occasionally lapsing into the slightly disjointed speech patterns, consistent with her cover identity's mental health background. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she protested as a female officer conducted a thorough body search. "I'm an American citizen. You can't just disappear me into some black site. I have rights." The officers maintained professional detachment, neither engaging with her protests nor displaying any reaction that might indicate whether they accepted her performance. Their procedural precision and lack of standard police identification further confirmed Rebecca's assessment. This was no ordinary arrest for an attack on a ceremonial guard. She had been classified as something far more significant. After processing, Rebecca was escorted to an interrogation room, sparse, functional, equipped with obvious recording devices and the one-way mirror typical of such facilities. She was secured to a metal loop embedded in the table, her restraints allowing limited movement but preventing any effective aggressive action. Then she was left alone, another standard technique designed to increase anxiety and psychological pressure before formal questioning. Rebecca used the isolation to continue her assessment and preparation. The room contained no obvious clues about the specific agency controlling the facility, but its construction and equipment suggested significant resources and specialized purpose. If this was indeed a counter-terrorism facility, standard interrogation would be conducted by officers with training in recognizing deception and resistance techniques. She would need to calibrate her performance precisely, maintaining cover while revealing nothing of operational significance. After approximately 40 minutes, the door opened to admit two individuals, a man and a woman, both in civilian clothes that nonetheless carried the unmistakable indicators of government service. The man was older, perhaps mid-50s, with the weathered features and assessing gaze of a career intelligence officer. The woman was younger, sharp-featured and alert, carrying a folder that likely contained the preliminary assessment of Rebecca's identity and the circumstances of her arrest. "Ms. Thompson," the man began, his tone neutral as he took the seat across from her. "Or should I say, Ms. Miller? I'm Mr. Pearson. This is my colleague, Ms. Donovan. We'd like to ask you some questions about what happened at Buckingham Palace today." The use of both names, her cover identity and her operational name, was deliberate, a technique designed to undermine her confidence in her cover. Rebecca responded with increased agitation, maintaining the performance of a person whose mental health issues were being exacerbated by stress and confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "My name is Rebecca Thompson. I'm a teacher from Minneapolis. I want to speak to someone from the American Embassy immediately." Pearson exchanged a glance with his colleague, a silent communication between experienced interrogators. "That's interesting," he replied, his tone conversational rather than confrontational. "Because your fingerprints match those of Karen Miller, formerly an analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency, someone who disappeared 3 years ago after a rather unfortunate incident in Yemen." The mention of Yemen sent an involuntary chill through Rebecca that she couldn't entirely suppress. Yemen had been real, the breaking point that had led to her recruitment by Marcus and the organization. That these interrogators knew about it suggested access to intelligence resources far beyond standard police or even counter-terrorism databases. "Don't know what you're talking about," she repeated, allowing her voice to tremble slightly. "I've never been to Yemen. I teach 3rd grade in Minneapolis. Please, there's been some mistake." Donovan opened the folder she had been carrying, removing several photographs and placing them on the table where Rebecca could see them. The images showed her in various locations over the past 3 years. Geneva, Paris, Prague, locations where she had conducted operations for the organization. In none of them was she disguised as Rebecca Thompson, but in each she was clearly recognizable despite various other identity concealments. "We've been building quite an extensive file on your activities, Ms. Miller," Donovan stated, her tone professional rather than accusatory. "Though I'll admit, attacking a royal guard at Buckingham Palace represents a significant escalation from your previous patterns." Rebecca stared at the photographs, mind racing beneath her maintained facade of confusion and distress. The existence of this surveillance record was deeply concerning, suggesting either that the organization's operational security had been compromised long before today's mission, or that she personally had been under observation without the organization's knowledge. Neither possibility aligned with what she understood about their capabilities and vigilance. "Those could be anyone," she protested weakly. "Just because someone looks like me doesn't mean—" "Biometric confirmation from multiple sources," Pearson interrupted smoothly. "Facial structure, gait analysis, behavioral patterns. The identification is conclusive, Ms. Miller. The only question now is why a former CIA analyst with your particular skill set and apparent disillusionment would be attacking a ceremonial guard at Buckingham Palace with military-grade weapons." The directness of the question suggested they were shifting interrogation tactics, moving from establishing identity to probing operational objectives. Rebecca maintained her confused persona, but allowed a slight shift in demeanor, as if the pressure was beginning to crack her resistance. "I want a lawyer," she demanded, her voice unsteady. "And someone from the embassy. I'm an American citizen." "Your citizenship status is somewhat complicated at the moment," Pearson replied, "given that the CIA officially listed you as missing, presumed dead after Yemen. As for legal representation, the nature of your attempted attack and the weapons recovered place this matter under specialized terrorism protocols, which modify the standard procedures considerably." He leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting to one of professional assessment. "But I think you know that already, Ms. Miller. Just as you know exactly what that tattoo on your wrist means, and why Sergeant Blake recognized it from his deployment in Afghanistan." The direct reference to the tattoo and Blake's recognition represented another escalation in interrogation pressure, demonstrating knowledge of operational details that suggested comprehensive intelligence beyond what would be expected from the immediate arrest circumstances. "I got this tattoo in college," Rebecca improvised, glancing at the small mark visible on her wrist where her sleeve had ridden up. "It's just a design I liked. I don't know what this sergeant thinks he recognized." Donovan smiled thinly. "Interesting choice then, considering it matches a symbol associated with a specific non-state actor group that has conducted operations in at least 7 countries over the past decade. A group that Sergeant Blake's SAS unit encountered during counter-terrorism operations in Helmand Province." The exchange confirmed Rebecca's earlier suspicion. This wasn't standard post-arrest interrogation, but something far more sophisticated, conducted by intelligence personnel with detailed knowledge of both her background and the organization she served. The implications were profound and disturbing, suggesting either long-term intelligence penetration of the organization or a deliberate operation targeting her specifically. "I think there's been some mistake," Rebecca insisted, though with diminishing conviction in her voice. "I'm just a teacher. I came to London on vacation. I don't know anything about Afghanistan or special forces or whatever you're talking about." Pearson sighed slightly, the gesture of someone recognizing a committed resistance strategy. He extracted a different photograph from the folder, placing it before Rebecca with deliberate care. This image showed Marcus, not in London, but somewhere desert-like, possibly the Middle East, dressed in tactical gear rather than his usual tailored clothing. "And I suppose you don't recognize Captain Marcus Headley either," Pearson suggested. "Formerly of British military intelligence, discharged under classified circumstances in 2015. The man you've been working with for the past 3 years, including your current operation in London." The photograph of Marcus in an operational environment she hadn't known about, combined with biographical details she had never been told, created the first genuine crack in Rebecca's mental composure. Her training had prepared her for interrogation resistance, but not for the disorientation of learning that her handler and mentor might have concealed fundamental truths about his own background and identity. She stared at the photograph, mind racing to integrate this new information with what she knew, or thought she knew, about Marcus. If he had been British military intelligence rather than the independent revolutionary he had presented himself as, what did that imply about the organization itself? About the cause she had committed to after Yemen? About the operations she had conducted believing they served a specific ideological purpose? "I'm done talking," she stated, the words emerging before she had fully formulated a response strategy. "Not another word until I have legal representation and embassy contact." Pearson and Donovan exchanged another glance, communicating something Rebecca couldn't quite interpret. Then Pearson gathered the photographs, returning them to the folder with methodical precision. "Of course, Ms. Miller, that's your right, even under the specialized protocols currently in effect." He rose from his chair, straightening his jacket with the unconscious gesture of someone accustomed to professional formality. "We'll arrange for you to be transferred to a holding facility while the necessary paperwork is processed. Given the sensitivity of this case, I imagine there will be considerable interest from multiple agencies in both Britain and the United States." The implied threat was subtle but clear. She now faced not just British authorities, but potentially CIA or other American intelligence agencies who would have their own questions about her disappearance after Yemen and subsequent activities. Given what she knew about such agencies' interrogation approaches for terrorism cases, the prospect was deeply concerning. As Pearson and Donovan prepared to leave, the male interrogator paused at the door, turning back with a final observation. One thing you might consider during your time in the holding facility, Ms. Miller, the fact that we were waiting for you at Buckingham Palace today, that Sergeant Blake was specifically positioned and prepared for your approach, suggests someone within your organization may have compromised your operation before it began. Perhaps loyalty isn't quite as valued by your colleagues as you've been led to believe. The door closed behind them, leaving Rebecca alone again in the interrogation room, her mind thrown into even greater turmoil by the parting suggestion. It was a classic interrogation technique. Sowing doubt about trusted relationships to create psychological vulnerability. But that didn't mean it lacked truth. The precise preparedness of Blake's response and these interrogators' detailed knowledge of both her and Marcus suggested intelligence that could only have come from sources very close to their operation. Had Marcus betrayed her? The possibility seemed inconceivable given their 3-year operational relationship, yet the evidence suggested either betrayal or catastrophic intelligence failure. Neither aligned with the Marcus she thought she knew, the meticulous planner, the careful strategist, the man who had given her purpose after Yemen had destroyed her faith in institutional service. The hours that followed passed in a blur of procedural movements, transfer from the interrogation room to a transport vehicle, journey to what appeared to be a more permanent detention facility, processing into a sparse but functional cell designed for high-security prisoners. Throughout, Rebecca maintained her cover identity's expected behaviors, while her mind continued processing the implications of what she had learned. The cell provided no clues about the specific agency holding her, no identifying markings, no distinctive architectural features, nothing but institutional functionality designed for containment rather than comfort. The absence of windows prevented any assessment of location based on external sightlines, while the lack of environmental sound suggested either significant distance from urban centers or sophisticated sound dampening technology. Rebecca sat on the narrow bed, back against the wall, knees drawn up in a posture that appeared defensive but actually provided optimal observation of the cell door and surveillance camera mounted in the corner. Her thoughts circled relentlessly around the central questions. Had Marcus knowingly sent her into a compromised operation? If so, why? And if not, how had British intelligence anticipated their plan with such precision? Sleep came in brief, fitful intervals, interrupted by institutional routines, meal delivery, bathroom access, periodic checks by facility personnel, who maintained professional detachment without engagement or conversation. Rebecca used these interruptions to mark the passage of time, estimating that approximately 18 hours had passed since her arrest at Buckingham Palace. 6 hours remained before the organization's standard extraction protocol would activate, assuming Marcus still intended to extract her, assuming the protocols hadn't been compromised along with the initial operation, assuming her entire understanding of her role and purpose hadn't been based on deliberate deception from the beginning. Too many assumptions, too little verified information. The foundation of her operational reality had been severely undermined, leaving her in the uncertain territory between trained resistance and genuine disorientation. If Marcus had betrayed her, her extraction might never come. If British intelligence had penetrated the organization deeply enough to compromise this operation, they might well intercept any extraction attempt. If her entire understanding of the organization's purpose had been false, she couldn't predict what either side might do next. The cell door opened unexpectedly, interrupting her circular analysis. Instead of the usual facility personnel, a woman entered, mid-40s, sharply dressed in professional attire that suggested senior government service rather than standard security or intelligence roles. Her bearing communicated authority without requiring explicit identification, and the way the guard deferred to her confirmed her position in whatever hierarchy controlled this facility. Ms. Miller, she began without preamble, closing the door behind her and taking the facility's only chair, positioned strategically to require Rebecca to either remain on the bed in a physically lower position or stand in a potentially threatening posture. I'm Deputy Director Hastings. I'll be overseeing your case personally given its particular significance. Rebecca remained seated, recognizing the power dynamic being established and choosing not to challenge it directly. The appearance of someone with deputy director rank suggested her case had been escalated to senior intelligence management, far beyond standard counter-terrorism protocols. As I've told everyone else, Rebecca replied, maintaining her cover identity's demeanor though with diminishing conviction. "My name is Rebecca Thompson. I don't know why you people keep calling me Miller." Hastings smiled thinly, neither accepting nor directly challenging the continued pretense. "Let's set aside the question of names for the moment. We both know the situation is considerably more complex than issues of mere identity. I'm here because decisions need to be made about your status and processing, decisions that will have significant implications for your future." The directness of the approach suggested shifting tactics, moving from interrogation aimed at extracting information to negotiation aimed at securing cooperation. This represented a potential opportunity, though fraught with its own dangers. "What kind of decisions?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "Whether you're processed through standard terrorism protocols with all that entails," Hastings replied matter-of-factly, "or whether alternative arrangements might be possible based on cooperation and mutual benefit." The implication was clear. Cooperation could lead to improved treatment and potentially reduced consequences, while continued resistance would result in the most severe application of counter-terrorism measures. It was a standard approach for intelligence services seeking to turn captured operatives into assets. "What kind of cooperation?" Rebecca probed, neither accepting nor rejecting the implicit offer. "Information about your organization," Hastings stated directly. "Structure, objectives, key personnel, operational methodologies, funding sources, everything you know about their activities and plans." Rebecca weighed her options carefully. Complete resistance would lead to enhanced interrogation and potentially transfer to U.S. custody, given her American citizenship and former CIA status. Feigned cooperation might buy time, but would quickly be exposed by experienced intelligence officers. Genuine cooperation would betray everything she had committed to for the past 3 years, assuming the organization truly represented what she had believed it did. The uncertainty created by the interrogators, revelations about Marcus's background, and the organization's possible deception complicated her decision enormously. If she had been manipulated into serving objectives she hadn't consented to, did she still owe loyalty to that cause? If Marcus had deliberately sent her into a compromised operation, did she owe him continued silence? "I need assurances," she said finally, testing the parameters of potential negotiation. "About my safety, my legal status, my future prospects if I were to consider cooperation." Hastings nodded, apparently satisfied with this initial opening. "Reasonable concerns. I can offer preliminary assurances now, with more formal arrangements, dependent on the value and verification of any information provided. Your safety would be guaranteed through protective custody protocols. Your legal status would transition from terrorism suspect to cooperating witness. Your future prospects would include potential resettlement with new identity after debriefing completion." The terms were standard for high-value defectors: protection in exchange for intelligence, followed by witness protection-style resettlement once the intelligence value had been exhausted. Neither better nor worse than Rebecca might have expected, given the circumstances. "And if I refuse?" she asked, needing to understand the full spectrum of options. "Then the standard terrorism protocols continue," Hastings replied without emotion. "Given the target of your attack and the weapons recovered, those protocols permit extended detention without formal charging, enhanced interrogation methods, and potential rendition to partner agencies with specific interest in your case, in this instance, likely your former employers at Langley." The mention of the CIA's headquarters location was deliberate, reinforcing that they knew exactly who she was and what she had done before joining Marcus's organization. The threat of rendition to CIA custody carried particular weight given what Rebecca knew about their approach to former employees who went rogue. "I need time to consider," she stated, neither committing nor refusing. "You have until tomorrow morning," Hastings responded, rising from the chair. "After that, procedural requirements force certain decisions, regardless of personal preference. I suggest you use the time wisely, Ms. Miller. Opportunities for alternative processing rarely remain available long in cases of this nature." With that parting observation, Hastings departed, the cell door closing with the definitive sound of high-security locks engaging. Rebecca remained seated on the bed, mind racing through the implications and options before her. The organization's extraction protocol would theoretically activate in approximately 5 hours, assuming standard timelines were being followed, assuming Marcus intended to extract her, assuming the entire operation hadn't been compromised from the beginning. If extraction came, the immediate decision would be made for her. If it didn't, she would face the choice Hastings had laid before her: cooperation with British intelligence or enhanced counter-terrorism processing with potential CIA rendition. Hours passed with agonizing slowness, each minute stretching Rebecca's nerves further as she balanced conflicting loyalties, uncertainties, and survival instincts. The periodic check by facility personnel continued with mechanical precision, each opening of the observation slot in the door raising momentary hope or fear that some development had occurred. When change finally came, it arrived with stunning violence and precision. The first indication was a momentary flicker in the cell's lighting, so brief it might have been imagined. Then a low-frequency vibration through the floor, subtle but unmistakable to someone trained to recognize the signatures of breaching charges used at carefully calculated distance. Rebecca moved instantly, taking position against the wall adjacent to the door, the location least visible to anyone entering and offering maximum defensive options. Years of operational training asserted themselves, overriding the uncertainty and confusion of the past 24 hours with the clarity of immediate tactical necessity. Distant alarms began to sound, followed by the distinctive popping of controlled, small arms fire, suppressed weapons being discharged in enclosed spaces, the sound dampened but recognizable to experienced operators. The pattern suggested a coordinated assault by multiple elements, precisely the approach the organization would use for high-priority extraction. The cell door lock disengaged with an electronic click rather than the expected key mechanism, suggesting system override rather than physical access. When the door swung open, Rebecca was already prepared to either defend or escape, depending on who appeared in the opening. The figure that entered moved with the efficient economy of professional operators, tactically equipped, face concealed by a balaclava, weapon held at ready position but not directly threatening. A quick visual assessment confirmed organization identifiers, equipment configuration, tactical positioning, the subtle hand gesture used for recognition in uncertain situations. Extraction active, the operative stated simply, voice muffled through the tactical gear. Movement corridor established, 90-second window, now. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Years of training and operational discipline overriding the uncertainties and questions that had consumed her hours earlier. She moved immediately, following the extraction operative into the corridor where 2 additional team members had established security positions covering both approaches. The facility was in controlled chaos, emergency lighting activated, alarm, systems wailing, but no visible security personnel in their immediate vicinity. The extraction team moved with practiced coordination, guiding Rebecca through a predetermined route that suggested extensive intelligence about the facility's layout. 60 seconds to transport link-up, the lead operative communicated as they reached what appeared to be a service corridor, less institutionally finished than the main detention areas. Overwatch confirms route clear. They reached a service exit that opened onto a loading dock area where a nondescript delivery van waited with engine running. The entire extraction had taken less than the 90 seconds initially specified, a testament to both the team's professionalism and the accuracy of their intelligence about the facility. As Rebecca was guided into the van's cargo area, she caught a glimpse of the facility's exterior. Concrete barriers, security fencing, surveillance equipment consistent with specialized detention rather than standard corrections. No identifying markings were visible from her limited perspective, maintaining the deliberate anonymity of the site. The van pulled away with controlled urgency, fast enough for efficient departure, but not so rapid as to attract undue attention from any potential observers. 2 operatives remained with Rebecca in the cargo area, maintaining tactical readiness while avoiding unnecessary communication. After approximately 15 minutes of travel, including multiple turns and speed variations that suggested counter-surveillance driving techniques, the van slowed and turned into what sounded like an underground parking structure. When it finally stopped and the rear doors opened, Rebecca found herself in a different kind of facility altogether. Clean, modern, with the distinctive aesthetics of a private sector operation rather than government installation. This way, one of the extraction team directed, leading her through a secure door into what appeared to be a medical assessment area. Standard post-extraction protocol. Rebecca complied, following organizational procedures she had trained in but never personally experienced. The medical assessment was brief but comprehensive: vital signs, diagnostic scanning for potential tracking implants or monitoring devices, blood samples for toxicology analysis to identify any interrogation chemicals that might have been administered. Clear, the medical technician announced after completing the assessment. No foreign objects, no chemical indicators, physical condition within acceptable parameters. Proceed to briefing, the extraction team leader instructed, gesturing toward another doorway. Rebecca followed the direction, mind beginning to process the implications now that the immediate extraction urgency had passed. The organization had implemented extraction protocols exactly as established, suggesting either that her suspicions about Marcus's potential betrayal were unfounded, or that the extraction served some purpose beyond her personal recovery. The door opened to reveal a spacious briefing room equipped with advanced communications and analytical technology, and there, standing at the central table reviewing data displays, was Marcus himself. He looked up as she entered, his expression revealing genuine relief, an unusual break in his typically controlled demeanor. "Karen," he acknowledged, using her real name rather than her operational identity. "Extraction successful and verified clean. Welcome back." Rebecca stopped just inside the doorway, conflicting emotions warring within her. Relief at the extraction, lingering suspicion about the compromised operation. Uncertainty about Marcus's true role and identity, given what the British interrogators had revealed. "You want to explain what happened at Buckingham Palace?" she asked directly, maintaining professional composure despite the turmoil beneath. Blake knew exactly who I was. He recognized the organization's mark from Afghanistan. Said his SAS unit encountered our people in Helmand. None of that was in my operational briefing. Marcus's expression shifted subtly, not guilt or deception, but something more complex, a calculation being performed in real time. "An intelligence failure," he acknowledged after a moment. "One with significant implications we're still assessing, but not here." He gestured to the extraction team members who remained present. "We're implementing full relocation protocols. This facility is temporary only." The response neither confirmed nor denied the British interrogator's claims about his background, or potentially deliberate compromise of the operation, maintaining operational security while acknowledging the failure without accepting specific responsibility. "Blake was waiting for me," Rebecca pressed, unwilling to accept ambiguity on this critical point. "The interrogators knew everything about me, about Yemen, about you. They had surveillance photographs from multiple operations over the past 3 years. That level of intelligence penetration doesn't happen by accident." Marcus's expression tightened slightly, the only visible indication that her challenge had registered. "We'll conduct full operational assessment during secure transit," he stated, his tone carrying the authority that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "For now, our priority is completing extraction and implementing containment protocols for any potential compromise." The professional response was exactly what Rebecca would have expected from the Marcus she had worked with for 3 years, focused on operational security and tactical necessities rather than personal concerns or explanations. Yet now, with the seeds of doubt planted by the British interrogators, she found herself questioning whether that professional demeanor concealed deliberate deception rather than operational discipline. The British interrogator, Pearson, said, "You were Captain Marcus Headley, formerly of British military intelligence," she stated bluntly, watching closely for his reaction. "Discharged under classified circumstances in 2015, is that true?" For a moment, genuine surprise registered in Marcus's expression, not at the information itself, but apparently at her knowledge of it. The reaction was brief but revealing, suggesting the British interrogators had indeed possessed accurate intelligence about his background. "Operational security, Karen," he replied, gesturing toward the extraction team members still present in the room. "Not the time or location for that discussion." The response neither confirmed nor denied the claim, using legitimate operational security concerns to defer addressing the substantive question. Under normal circumstances, Rebecca would have accepted this professional prioritization of security over personal concerns. But the events at Buckingham Palace and subsequent interrogation had fundamentally altered her perspective. "No," she stated flatly, maintaining her position by the door rather than approaching the briefing table as would be standard procedure. "I need to know now, before I go anywhere else with this team, before I accept any further operational direction. From you, was the Buckingham Palace operation compromised from the beginning? Did you knowingly send me into a situation where Blake was waiting for me?" Marcus studied her for a long moment, his assessing gaze measuring her determination against operational necessities. Then he gestured to the extraction team members. "Secure the perimeter. Full privacy protocol." The operatives departed without comment or hesitation, leaving Rebecca alone with the man who had been her handler, mentor, and operational cornerstone for 3 years. The man she now questioned in ways that would have seemed inconceivable 24 hours earlier. "You were not intentionally sacrificed," Marcus stated once they were alone, his tone shifting from operational authority to something more direct and personal. "The intelligence failure regarding Blake's background and prior contact with our organization was genuine and is being investigated at the highest levels." "And your background?" Rebecca pressed. "British military intelligence? Is that true?" Marcus's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes suggested internal calculation, weighing how much to reveal against operational security protocols and perhaps personal considerations as well. "Yes," he acknowledged finally, "I served with British military intelligence. That part of Pearson's information was accurate. The circumstances of my departure and subsequent activities are more complex than his simplified narrative suggested." The confirmation landed with physical force despite Rebecca's mental preparation for it. One truth from the interrogators validated, suggesting others might be equally accurate. The implications rippled through her understanding of the past 3 years, casting shadows over operations, objectives, and her own role within the organization. "What else have you concealed?" she demanded, professional composure beginning to fray at the edges. "Is the organization what you've claimed it to be? Are our objectives what you've told me they are? Have I been fighting against corrupt power structures or serving some other agenda entirely?" Marcus moved away from the briefing table, approaching her with the careful body language of someone recognizing volatile emotions beneath controlled exterior. "The organization's purpose and objectives are exactly as I've represented them to you," he stated with quiet intensity. "The methods and operational structures have necessarily involved compartmentalization and limited disclosure, as you've understood from the beginning." "Compartmentalization doesn't explain sending me against a target with personal history against the organization," Rebecca countered. "It doesn't explain the level of intelligence the British had about our operations over multiple years and multiple countries. Something fundamental doesn't align, Marcus." For the first time in their 3-year relationship, something like genuine uncertainty crossed Marcus's features. Not the calculated consideration of operational variables, but a more personal hesitation, as if navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. "The current situation has created complications beyond standard operational parameters," he acknowledged, the formal phrasing at odds with the personal tension visible in his expression. "Your extraction was prioritized at the highest levels. The broader implications of the Buckingham Palace compromise are still being assessed. But I give you my word, Karen, you were not deliberately sacrificed or betrayed." The sincerity seemed genuine. Yet Rebecca found herself unable to accept it with the unquestioning trust that would have characterized her response before Buckingham Palace. Too much had been revealed, too many certainties undermined, too many questions left unanswered. "I need more than words," she stated, holding his gaze with newfound assertiveness. "I need to understand exactly what happened, who knew what, and what it means for my position moving forward. No more compartmentalization, no more need-to-know limitations, no more strategic ambiguity." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression revealing complex calculation beneath the composed exterior. When he finally spoke, his tone carried a gravity she had rarely heard from him outside the most critical operational situations. That level of disclosure would require authorization beyond my individual discretion, he said carefully. But given the circumstances and your specific value to the organization, I believe it can be arranged. Not here. This location remains temporary only. But once we've reached secure transport and initiated relocation protocols. It wasn't the immediate, comprehensive explanation Rebecca wanted, but it represented a significant concession from standard organizational security protocols. The acknowledgement of her specific value suggested a recognition of her changed status, no longer simply an operative following directions, but someone whose continued cooperation required unprecedented transparency. How long until transport? She asked, accepting the operational necessity of movement without fully resolving the underlying trust issues. 30 minutes, Marcus replied, visibly relieved that she had accepted the deferral of full explanation. Standard equipment replacement, identity documentation, and preliminary medical support will be completed during that window. Rebecca nodded, the practical necessities of their situation temporarily overriding the deeper questions that remained unresolved. Whatever the truth about Marcus, the organization, and her own role within it, immediate security required cooperative movement from their current location. I'll prepare for transport, she acknowledged. But this conversation isn't over, Marcus. Not by a long measure. I would expect nothing less, he replied, a hint of what might have been genuine respect coloring his tone. Your analytical persistence was always your greatest strength, even when directed at me. As she turned to follow standard post-extraction protocols, Rebecca found herself in the most precarious position of her operational career. Physically extracted from immediate danger, but navigating a landscape of shifted loyalties, uncertain alliances, and fundamental questions about the cause she had committed to after Yemen. Blake's recognition of the organization's symbol, the interrogator's detailed knowledge of both her and Marcus, and now the confirmation of Marcus's concealed background had created fissures in the foundation of her operational reality. What remained to be seen was whether those fissures could be repaired through the promised disclosure, or whether they represented the beginning of an irreparable collapse. As medical technicians replaced the prison-grade clothing with appropriate operational attire and security personnel prepared specialized equipment for the transport phase, Rebecca found herself mentally reviewing every operation, every briefing, every philosophical discussion with Marcus over the past 3 years, searching for inconsistencies or manipulations she might have missed in her committed belief in their cause. Whether that cause remained worthy of her commitment would depend on what Marcus revealed during the promised disclosure. But one thing had become crystal clear amid the uncertain aftermath of Buckingham Palace. She would never again accept operational direction on faith alone, not even, perhaps especially not, from the man who had given her purpose after Yemen, had destroyed her previous beliefs. The inciting incident at Buckingham Palace had done more than disrupt a specific operation. It had fundamentally altered her perception of the organization, her role within it, and her relationship with the handler who had shaped her operational identity for 3 years. Whatever came next would be navigated with newly awakened vigilance, and the determination to understand the complete reality of the cause she had served, even if that understanding revealed truths she hadn't been prepared to face before. Blake's unexpected recognition and the revelations that followed. The transport vehicle moved swiftly through London's pre-dawn streets, its route deliberately convoluted to evade potential surveillance. Inside the specially modified Range Rover, with its reinforced chassis and bulletproof glass, Rebecca sat across from Marcus, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. 2 additional operatives occupied the front seats, a driver focused on evasive navigation techniques and a security specialist maintaining vigilant observation of their surroundings. Rebecca had changed into practical clothing provided during the extraction, dark tactical pants, lightweight pullover, and a jacket that offered both unremarkable appearance and functional utility. The outfit included concealed holsters and pockets for weapons and equipment, though she remained unarmed pending full security assessment. Standard protocol after compromised operations, but the precaution carried different significance now, given her expressed suspicions about Marcus and the organization. Our immediate destination is a private airfield in Sussex, Marcus informed her, breaking the silence that had persisted since their departure from the extraction facility. From There, secure transport to a continental European facility for comprehensive debriefing and the disclosure I've promised. Rebecca studied him with newly analytical attention, noting the subtle indicators of stress that might have escaped someone without her training, the minute tension around his eyes, the carefully measured breathing, the unconscious adjustment of his posture to maintain optimal awareness of both her and the vehicle's surroundings. Sussex puts us approximately 90 minutes from London, assuming standard traffic patterns, she observed. That's significant exposure time given the probable security response to my extraction had been led to understand they operated within. And the organization itself? She continued, pushing for the most critical piece of contextual understanding. What is its actual designation, structure, and primary objective? This question triggered a more visible hesitation, Marcus's expression suggesting he approached a boundary of disclosure that required particular care even in this moment of unusual transparency. The organization is designated Prometheus, he stated finally. Its structure is compartmentalized but hierarchical, with specialized divisions for intelligence, operations, technical support, and strategic direction. As for primary objective, he paused, selecting his words with evident care. The fundamental purpose I've described to you remains accurate, confronting corrupt power structures and exposing institutional vulnerabilities that enable abuse and exploitation. The specific methodologies and strategic approach are more complex than previously communicated, but the core mission remains as I've represented it. The response offered substantive information while maintaining strategic ambiguity about certain aspects, a partial transparency that neither fully satisfied Rebecca's demand for clarity nor dismissed it entirely. The designation Prometheus was itself significant. The mythological figure who defied the gods to bring fire to humanity, suffering eternal punishment for this transgression against established order. So you've been truthful about why, but not about who, what, or how, she summarized, her analytical mind organizing the implications of this limited disclosure. The cause was represented accurately, but the organization, structure, and methodologies were deliberately obscured. Compartmentalization serves both operational security and psychological preparation, Marcus acknowledged. Your recruitment after Yemen required careful calibration, providing purpose without overwhelming with organizational complexities that might have impeded your integration and development. The explanation carried a certain psychological logic while simultaneously confirming that her understanding of the organization had been deliberately managed throughout her 3-year involvement. This raised fundamental questions about agency and informed consent. Had she truly chosen her path or been skillfully guided through a predetermined development trajectory? And Buckingham Palace? She asked, returning to the immediate circumstances that had precipitated this unprecedented disclosure. Was the operation exactly what you briefed? Or were there additional objectives I wasn't informed about? Marcus's expression shifted subtly, the first indication of genuine discomfort rather than calculated consideration. The operation had multiple objectives, he admitted after a noticeable pause. Your role was accurately briefed. Create a high-profile security incident to generate media coverage and political response. But there were concurrent operational elements you weren't informed about due to standard compartmentalization protocols. What elements? Rebecca demanded, sensing they approached something significant in understanding the true nature of both the failed operation and potentially her entire involvement with Prometheus. Before Marcus could respond, the security specialist, in the front passenger seat, interrupted with professional urgency. Surveillance drone detected on parallel tracking vector, 3 o'clock position, approximately half-kilometer distance. Signature suggests military-grade capabilities rather than commercial platform. Marcus immediately shifted focus, operational necessity overtaking the disclosure conversation. Counter-surveillance protocol Theta, he instructed concisely. Deploy ECM package and execute route modification Baker 6. The directives triggered immediate response, the driver smoothly changing course, while the security specialist activated electronic countermeasures designed to disrupt drone tracking capabilities. Rebecca observed the efficiency of their response while mentally cataloging this additional evidence of sophisticated capabilities and protocols beyond what had been visible in her previous operational experiences. Conversation continues at secure location, Marcus stated, his attention now fully engaged with the immediate security threat. Operational security takes priority until arrival. Rebecca accepted the necessary interruption, her training asserting itself despite her personal frustration at the delayed disclosure. Whatever the full truth about Prometheus and her role within it, immediate survival required professional focus on evading what appeared to be a sophisticated pursuit operation by British security services. The journey continued in tense silence, broken only by periodic security updates and response coordination. The driver executed a complex evasion pattern that suggested both extensive pre-planning and real-time adaptation to emerging surveillance threats. Multiple vehicle changes, underground parking facilities with electromagnetic shielding, and brief, urban foot movements created a comprehensive counter-surveillance operation that demonstrated Prometheus's significant capabilities and resources. By mid-morning, they had reached the promised private airfield, a small facility with minimal infrastructure but a well-maintained runway suitable for medium-range private aircraft. A sleek Gulfstream G550 waited on the tarmac, engines already running in preparation for immediate departure. Final approach security? Marcus inquired as they observed the airfield from a concealed position approximately half a kilometer from the perimeter. Clean as of 3 minutes ago, the security specialist replied, checking data on a specialized communications device. Perimeter team reports no unusual activity. Electronic surveillance negative. Airspace nominal except for scheduled commercial traffic at altitude. Marcus nodded acknowledgement, then turned to Rebecca. Standard approach protocol. Vehicle to second security checkpoint. Foot movement final 100 meters. Immediate boarding and departure. Questions? The procedural clarity was familiar. The operational markers she had worked with for 3 years, focused and precise. Despite her lingering suspicions, Rebecca found herself responding to this professional competence with instinctive trust at the tactical level. Time window for airspace clearance? She asked, focusing on operational details rather than the larger questions that remained unresolved. 12 minutes from arrival at aircraft to wheels up, Marcus replied. Regional air. Traffic patterns provide optimal departure window between commercial flights from Gatwick. The information was precise and tactically relevant, reinforcing the operational professionalism that had characterized their working relationship, regardless of whatever broader deceptions might have occurred regarding organizational structure and objectives. The approach proceeded exactly as outlined. Vehicle movement to the secondary checkpoint, followed by careful foot approach using natural terrain features for concealment, then final sprint to the waiting aircraft once perimeter. Security confirmed clean conditions. Throughout, Rebecca maintained heightened awareness of both external threats and the Prometheus operatives themselves, her trust no longer extending automatically to those who had been colleagues just days earlier. The Gulfstream's interior revealed additional evidence of Prometheus's substantial resources. Advanced communications equipment, specialized security systems, and comfortable but functional seating arranged for both operational efficiency and extended travel. A medical specialist was present, conducting rapid health assessment as Rebecca boarded. Standard protocol for extractions, but performed with a thoroughness that suggested particular concern about her condition after detention. Vital signs within normal parameters. No evidence of chemical interrogation compounds. Physical condition consistent with standard detention protocols rather than enhanced measures. The specialist reported to Marcus after completing the assessment. Cleared for extended transport without medical limitations. Marcus acknowledged the report with a nod, then secured himself in a seat positioned to maintain both visual contact with Rebecca and operational awareness of aircraft activities. Departure in 3 minutes. He informed her as she selected her own position, choosing a seat that provided optimal observation of both Marcus and the other operatives while maintaining proximity to emergency exits. Flight time approximately 2 hours to initial destination. Which is where exactly? Rebecca asked, testing whether geographical disclosure would be provided now that they had left British territory. Secure facility in eastern France, Marcus replied, offering concrete information rather than continued operational ambiguity. Transitional location only, for preliminary debriefing and initial disclosure as promised. Final destination will depend on security assessment and organizational requirements following that disclosure. The aircraft began taxiing as they spoke, the pilots executing departure procedures with professional efficiency that suggested specialized training beyond standard civilian aviation. Rebecca noted multiple deviations from normal procedures, communication protocols, runway approach patterns, engine management, all indicating security considerations integrated into every aspect of the operation. Takeoff was smooth despite the relatively short runway, the aircraft climbing rapidly to cruising altitude with a performance profile that suggested specialized modifications for both speed and maneuverability beyond standard civilian specifications. Once level flight was established, the operational tension visibly decreased. Distance from British territory and altitude combining to reduce immediate security threats. A communications specialist approached Marcus, speaking quietly enough that Rebecca couldn't hear the exchange despite her optimal position. Whatever information was conveyed prompted a subtle shift in Marcus's expression. Not concern exactly, but a recalibration of operational assessment. "Status update," he stated, addressing Rebecca directly once the specialist had returned to his station. "British authorities have implemented full counter-terrorism protocols in response to your extraction. Air and ground assets deployed, border security enhanced, intelligence sharing activated with European partners. Media management protocols also in effect. Your identity and the circumstances of both initial arrest and subsequent extraction are being suppressed pending ongoing investigation." The response scale confirmed Rebecca's assessment of her classified significance far beyond what a simple attack on a ceremonial guard would typically generate. This aligned with her suspicion that the Buckingham Palace operation had carried objectives and implications beyond what she had been briefed. "That level of response suggests I'm being categorized as something far more significant than a disturbed American tourist with a stun gun," she observed, watching Marcus carefully for his reaction. "The British security services are aware of Prometheus as an organization of concern," he acknowledged. "Your connection to it automatically elevates classification and response parameters regardless of the specific incident involved. This confirmation that British intelligence specifically recognized Prometheus by name and considered it significant enough to trigger enhanced security protocols represented another piece of contextual understanding that had been withheld during Rebecca's operational briefings. The pattern of selective disclosure was becoming increasingly apparent with each new revelation. "And when exactly were you planning to inform me that I was operating as an agent of an organization already identified and classified by multiple intelligence services?" she asked, allowing a hint of the anger she felt to color her tone despite her general operational discipline. Marcus met her gaze directly, his expression suggesting this particular aspect of disclosure carried personal as well as operational significance for him. "That awareness is relatively recent," he stated carefully. "Intelligence services have been tracking elements of Prometheus for approximately 18 months, though with incomplete understanding of its structure and objectives. The designation as an organization of concern occurred only within the past 6 months, primarily in response to operations you weren't directly involved with. The timeline suggested that British intelligence awareness had developed during her active service with Prometheus rather than predating her recruitment, potentially explaining why this particular information hadn't been disclosed earlier. Yet, it still represented a significant operational reality that had been concealed during her recent mission planning. Which brings us back to Buckingham Palace," Rebecca noted, connecting this revelation to her original question about additional operational objectives. "If British intelligence had Prometheus on their radar, the operation carried substantially higher risk than I was briefed. What were the concurrent elements you mentioned earlier?" The aircraft encountered brief turbulence, providing a momentary interruption that Rebecca suspected Marcus might have welcomed, given his visible recalculation about how to approach this particular disclosure. When stability returned, he appeared to reach a decision about transparency parameters. "The Buckingham Palace operation had 3 concurrent objectives," he stated, his tone shifting to the precise briefing mode she was familiar with from mission planning sessions. "First, the visible security incident you were tasked with creating, designed to generate media coverage and political response. Second, a cyber penetration operation targeting secure communication infrastructure beneath The palace, using the security response to your action as cover for physical access to specific connection nodes. Third, intelligence collection regarding British Security Service reaction patterns, deployment protocols, and coordination mechanisms during high-profile incidents at sensitive locations. The multi-layered operational design was sophisticated and technically sound from a tactical perspective, creating efficient use of a single initiating action to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. Yet it also represented a significant departure from the operational transparency Rebecca had believed characterized her relationship with Marcus and Prometheus. "So I was essentially a diversion," she summarized, the implications settling into a coherent assessment of her actual role. Creating a visible incident to draw attention and security response, while the actual primary objectives were pursued separately. "Your role was essential rather than diversionary," Marcus countered, the distinction clearly important to him despite its potentially semantic nature. The visible security incident was a legitimate operational objective in its own right. Demonstration of institutional vulnerability at a symbolically significant location. The concurrent elements were complementary rather than primary. The explanation aligned with Prometheus's stated philosophical approach to exposing institutional vulnerabilities, yet the compartmentalization of operational elements contradicted the partnership model Rebecca had believed characterized her relationship with Marcus. She had been deployed with partial understanding rather than comprehensive operational awareness, a tool rather than a fully informed participant. "And the cyber penetration team?" she asked, focusing on concrete operational details rather than the more complex question of her own agency within the organization. "Were they successful or compromised?" "Along with my element, partially successful," Marcus replied after brief consideration that suggested calculating appropriate disclosure levels rather than uncertainty about operational outcomes. "Initial access achieved, preliminary data extraction completed, but full penetration objectives not accomplished due to enhanced security response following your apprehension. The team extracted without detection or compromise." The mixed results suggested that while her capture had disrupted the full operational plan, the other elements had at least achieved partial success and escaped without the comprehensive intelligence compromise that had characterized her experience. This asymmetric outcome further reinforced her assessment that she had been deployed in a higher risk role with less complete operational information than other elements. "And was Sergeant Blake's specific background and experience with the organization in Afghanistan known during mission planning?" she asked, approaching the most critical question about potential deliberate compromise or sacrifice of her operational security. Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the first genuine indication of discomfort rather than calculated consideration. "That specific intelligence was not available during planning," he stated with careful precision. Blake's current assignment to ceremonial duties was confirmed, but his prior operational history in Helmand Province and specific encounters with Prometheus elements were not identified in pre-mission intelligence assessment. The statement was technically responsive, while potentially obscuring broader questions about intelligence quality and sources. It confirmed the specific failure without addressing how such a critical gap could have occurred, given Prometheus's apparent sophisticated capabilities and resources. "That represents a catastrophic intelligence failure for an organization with the capabilities you've demonstrated," Rebecca observed, pressing on this crucial inconsistency. "How does an operation targeting a specific individual misdirect prior contact with the organization, especially combat contact resulting in casualties?" The question cut to the heart of her suspicion that the mission had been compromised from the beginning, that she had been deliberately deployed against a target known to have specific knowledge about and hostility toward Prometheus operatives. Marcus appeared to recognize the significance of the question and the depth of her suspicion behind it. His response came after visible consideration, suggesting an unusual level of personal rather than merely operational engagement with the issue. "The intelligence failure has been classified as Priority Alpha for internal investigation," he acknowledged, using formal organizational terminology she hadn't previously encountered. "Preliminary assessment suggests deliberate counterintelligence manipulation rather than simple oversight or resource limitation. The possibility that mission planning was compromised by hostile intelligence penetration is being treated as the primary working hypothesis. This represented the most direct acknowledgement yet, that Rebecca's suspicions might have foundation, that her mission might indeed have been compromised from the beginning, not through Marcus's deliberate action, but through hostile intelligence. Service penetration of Prometheus's planning and assessment capabilities. Before she could pursue this critical line of inquiry further, the aircraft began its descent sequence, earlier than the 2-hour flight time Marcus had initially indicated. This deviation from stated parameters immediately triggered her operational awareness, attention shifting from disclosure conversation to potential security threat. Revised arrival protocol, Marcus explained, recognizing her alert posture. Standard security precaution, not threat response. We're diverting to secondary facility due to routine surveillance detection at primary destination. Contingency planning, rather, than compromise indicator. The explanation was plausible and consistent with standard security protocols she was familiar with. Yet Rebecca maintained heightened awareness as the aircraft executed an approach pattern consistent with tactical rather than commercial aviation. Parameters: steep descent, minimal communication, approach vector optimized for reduced visibility from ground observation points. Landing occurred on what appeared to be a private airstrip rather than formal aviation facility, a paved runway with minimal infrastructure surrounded by forested terrain that provided natural concealment from broader observation. The aircraft taxied directly into a hangar-like structure that closed behind them with mechanized efficiency, creating a secure disembarkation environment invisible to external surveillance. "Welcome to Facility Arcadia," Marcus stated as they prepared to exit the aircraft. "Temporary but secure location for the preliminary disclosure I've promised. From here, our next steps will depend entirely on your response to what you're about to learn about Prometheus, its actual structure and objectives, and your role within a much larger operational framework than you've previously been aware of." Sighing, statement carried an unusual weight, suggesting that the forthcoming disclosure represented not merely additional operational information, but a fundamental recontextualization of everything Rebecca had understood about her work with Prometheus over the past 3 years. Whatever she was about to learn would apparently determine not just her next deployment, but her entire future relationship with the organization that had given her purpose after Yemen. As she followed Marcus from the aircraft into the secure facility, Rebecca maintained the professional composure that had characterized her operational discipline throughout her career. Yet beneath that composed exterior, her mind continued processing the implications of each new revelation and inconsistency. Constructing a continuously evolving assessment of Prometheus, Marcus, and her own position within what was clearly a far more complex and potentially troubling reality than she had understood before Buckingham Palace. Facility Arcadia proved to be more substantial than its concealed exterior suggested. A comprehensive, underground installation with multiple security levels, specialized communication infrastructure, and operational capabilities consistent with a significant regional base rather than merely a temporary safe location. As Marcus led Rebecca through security checkpoints of increasing sophistication, she cataloged details that further confirmed Prometheus's resources and organizational depth extended far beyond what she had previously observed. The personnel they encountered represented another revelation. Individuals with the distinctive bearing and specialized skill indicators of intelligence, professionals and military operators, rather than the revolutionary idealists Rebecca had been led to believe, constituted the organization's primary membership. These were career professionals, not recruited activists or disillusioned former institutional employees like herself. The disclosure briefing will occur in Secure Center Alpha, Marcus informed her as they passed through what appeared to be a command section with multiple workstations monitoring global information feeds and operational deployments. "Director Keller is waiting to provide the organizational context I promised." "Director Keller?" Rebecca questioned, the unfamiliar name representing yet another element of Prometheus's structure she had never been informed about. "Another regional operations director like yourself?" "European Strategic Director," Marcus clarified, the title suggesting a position senior to his own in whatever hierarchy governed Prometheus. "One of the individuals authorized to provide the level of disclosure you've been promised." The reference Two authorization hierarchies and formal leadership structures contrasted sharply with the revolutionary cell model Rebecca had been led to understand they operated within. This organizational reality aligned more closely with traditional intelligence services or military special operations command structures than the decentralized resistance movement she had believed she was serving. They reached a secure conference facility, advanced technology evident in the specialized security, systems protecting access and monitoring surroundings. Inside, a woman waited, perhaps mid-50s, with striking silver hair and the poised confidence of someone accustomed to command authority. She rose as they entered, studying Rebecca with analytical intensity that suggested comprehensive prior knowledge rather than new acquaintance. "Ms. Miller," she greeted with a slight German accent, using Rebecca's real name rather than her operational identity. "I'm Director Elise Keller. Welcome to your first experience of actual Prometheus operational infrastructure rather than the limited field perspective you've operated from until now." The greeting carried both acknowledgement and subtle challenge, confirming that Rebecca's previous understanding had been deliberately constrained while suggesting that this limitation had been a necessary developmental phase rather than merely deception. "Apparently, there's a great deal about Prometheus I haven't been permitted to know," Rebecca responded, maintaining professional composure despite the internal turmoil these continued revelations generated. "Director Marcus has provided some preliminary context, but indicated you're authorized to deliver the comprehensive disclosure I've been promised." Keller's expression showed momentary surprise at Rebecca's reference to Director Marcus, her glance toward him carrying unspoken communication before returning to Rebecca with recalibrated assessment. "Indeed, please be seated. What you're about to learn represents information normally reserved for Level 3 personnel and above. Your accelerated access has been authorized due to both the Buckingham Palace compromise and your demonstrated operational value over the past 3 years." The formalized reference to clearance levels and authorized access further confirmed Prometheus's structured nature, more closely resembling intelligence agency protocols than revolutionary movement practices. Rebecca took the offered seat while maintaining optimal awareness of both Keller and Marcus. Her trust now extended conditionally rather than automatically to either. "I'll begin with organizational reality," Keller stated, activating a secure display system embedded in the conference table. "Prometheus is not, as you've been led to understand, a decentralized revolutionary movement focused on exposing corrupt power structures through isolated operations. That conceptual framework was deliberately provided during your recruitment, an initial operational phase, a psychological preparation appropriate to your specific background and mindset following Yemen." The display showed an organizational structure far more comprehensive and formalized than anything Rebecca had previously been aware of. Specialized divisions for intelligence collection, operational planning, technical support, strategic assessment, and regional commands covering global rather than merely European territory. In reality, Prometheus is a specialized non-state intelligence and direct action organization with global operational capabilities and strategic objectives focused on systemic rather than merely institutional transformation. Keller continued, her tone suggesting this revelation should be received as clarification rather than contradiction of Rebecca's previous understanding. "Non-state meaning what exactly?" Rebecca asked, focusing on this critical distinction from traditional intelligence services or military organizations. "Privately funded, multinational cooperative, corporate security entity." Keller exchanged another glance with Marcus before responding, suggesting this particular aspect of disclosure required careful calibration. "Prometheus operates without formal state sponsorship or direct governmental authority," she stated with precise word choice that Rebecca immediately recognized as potentially obscuring rather than clarifying. "Our funding derives from diversified sources designed to ensure operational independence from any single controlling interest." The response was technically informative while strategically ambiguous, neither confirming nor denying potential state influence or indirect sponsorship. Rebecca noted this particular evasion while maintaining focus on the broader disclosure in progress. "And the actual objective?" she pressed, seeking clarity on the most fundamental question about Prometheus's purpose. Director Marcus indicated that confronting corrupt power structures remains accurate as a core mission, but suggested the specific methodologies and strategic approach differ from what I've been led to understand. The core mission as described to you remains valid, Keller confirmed, advancing the display to show what appeared to be a strategic assessment framework. Prometheus exists to confront institutional corruption and abuse of power. The distinction lies in strategic methodology and ultimate objective. We operate not merely to expose vulnerabilities or generate public awareness, but to systematically reshape power dynamics through coordinated intelligence operations, strategic influence campaigns, and precisely targeted direct actions. The description suggested an organization with ambitions and capabilities far beyond the revolutionary exposure operations Rebecca had participated in, something closer to a shadow intelligence agency pursuing systemic change through sophisticated means rather than merely highlighting institutional failures through isolated demonstrations. Reshape power dynamics how exactly? Rebecca inquired, seeking concrete understanding beyond abstract strategic terminology. What specific outcomes is Prometheus pursuing through these methods? Keller's expression suggested appreciation for the directness of the question. The prevailing global power structure enables institutional corruption and systematic abuse through foundational design flaws, prioritizing established authority over accountability, secrecy over transparency, institutional stability over justice. Prometheus works to fundamentally alter those dynamics, creating systems where power remains accountable, transparency functions as institutional norm rather than exception, and justice takes precedence over mere stability. The philosophical framework remained consistent with what Marcus had presented throughout Rebecca's involvement with Prometheus. Yet the scale and methods now being disclosed represented a significant expansion of operational reality. This wasn't merely exposing corrupt officials or demonstrating security vulnerabilities. This was systematic pursuit of fundamental restructuring of global power relationships. And Buckingham Palace? Rebecca asked, returning to the specific operation that had precipitated this unprecedented disclosure. How did attacking a ceremonial guard contribute to reshaping global power dynamics? The question carried obvious skepticism that Keller appeared to acknowledge with a slight nod before responding. The Buckingham Palace operation represented multiple strategic objectives beyond the tactical elements you were briefed on. First, demonstration of security vulnerability at a symbolically significant institution of traditional power. Second, intelligence collection regarding British security, response protocols at highest value targets. Third, and most significantly, penetration of secure communication infrastructure that connects multiple power centers within the British government and monarchy. The explanation aligned with what Marcus had revealed during their flight, while suggesting additional strategic significance beyond the tactical objectives he had described. Rebecca noted this consistency, while continuing to assess both the information being provided and the manner of its presentation. And was my capture and interrogation part of those strategic objectives? She asked, approaching the most critical question about her own role and potential deliberate sacrifice for organizational goals. Was I knowingly sent against a target who had specific history with and knowledge about Prometheus operatives? Keller's expression shifted subtly. The first genuine reaction, rather than carefully calibrated response. She glanced at Marcus again before answering, something in her demeanor suggesting this particular question carried significance beyond mere operational assessment. No, she stated with unusual directness. Your capture was neither intended nor anticipated. The intelligence failure regarding Sergeant Blake's background and prior contact with Prometheus operatives in Afghanistan represents a serious breach of operational security protocols. This failure is currently subject to priority alpha investigation, with preliminary assessment pointing to hostile counterintelligence penetration rather than internal procedural breakdown. The response aligned with what Marcus had conveyed earlier, suggesting consistency in explanation if not necessarily accuracy in content. Rebecca noted this alignment while maintaining her analytical assessment of potential deception or manipulation. And the extraction, she continued, pursuing the logical sequence of events. The resources deployed to recover me from British custody suggest significant organizational investment in my specific value. Yet I'm clearly compartmentalized to a degree that raises questions about that perceived value. Your extraction was prioritized precisely because of your potential value combined with your compartmentalized knowledge state. Keller explained, her tone suggesting this particular aspect should be obvious to someone with Rebecca's intelligence. Background: an operative with your capabilities, who knew only limited aspects of Prometheus's actual structure and objectives, represented minimal compromise risk while retaining maximum operational potential. Your extraction protected both organizational security and valuable human resources simultaneously. The explanation carried logical consistency, while simultaneously confirming that Rebecca's limited knowledge of Prometheus had been deliberately maintained as a security measure rather than merely developmental consideration. She had been kept compartmentalized not just for psychological preparation, but as specific compromise limitation strategy, valued for capabilities while deliberately restricted in understanding. "And now?" she asked, focusing on the immediate implications of this disclosure rather than its historical context. "What changes given that I'm now being provided this broader understanding of Prometheus's actual nature and objectives?" Keller exchanged another significant glance with Marcus before responding, suggesting this particular question approached decision points, requiring coordinated rather than merely individual assessment. "That depends entirely on your response to this disclosure," Keller stated with careful precision. "You now understand Prometheus's actual organizational structure, operational methodologies, and strategic objectives at a level normally reserved for senior personnel. This understanding creates both opportunity and decision point. You can choose to integrate this knowledge and continue service at enhanced operational level, or you can determine that this organizational reality conflicts with your personal principles and objectives." The response framed the disclosure as opportunity rather than mere information transfer, while simultaneously establishing that Rebecca now faced an explicit choice about continued involvement with Prometheus, given her new understanding of its actual nature. This represented a significant shift from the operational relationship she had experienced previously, where assignments were provided rather than chosen, and organizational understanding was controlled rather than offered. "And if I determine the latter?" she asked, testing the parameters of this apparent choice. "If I decide that the actual Prometheus differs too significantly from what I believed I was serving?" The directness of the question appeared to surprise both Keller and Marcus, though their professional discipline limited visible reaction to subtle shifts in posture and expression. Keller responded after brief consideration that suggested both policy application and situational assessment. "Prometheus recognizes that informed consent requires genuine choice," she stated, her tone carrying formal rather than merely conversational. "Wait. If you determine that continued service conflicts with your principles, separation protocols would be implemented, memory suppression techniques for sensitive operational information, identity reconstruction support, and relocation assistance, to ensure both your security and ours." The response was simultaneously reassuring and disturbing, offering apparent freedom of choice while casually referencing memory suppression techniques that suggested capabilities and methodologies far removed from the revolutionary idealism Rebecca had believed characterized the organization. The reference to such techniques represented yet another revelation about Prometheus's true nature and technological capabilities. "Memory suppression techniques," she repeated, unable to entirely keep skepticism from her tone despite general professional composure. "That sounds more like intelligence agency black operations than revolutionary justice seeking." Keller's expression suggested understanding of this reaction without necessarily sharing the perspective behind it. "Prometheus utilizes all available technological and psychological methodologies required for operational security," she acknowledged without apparent discomfort. "The distinction lies not in tools employed, but purposes served. Traditional intelligence agencies deploy such capabilities to maintain existing power structures. We utilize them to protect those working to transform those structures." The justification carried the familiar philosophical framing Rebecca had encountered throughout her involvement with Prometheus, focusing on purpose rather than method to distinguish their activities from those of the institutions they claimed to oppose. Yet, the revelation of capabilities identical to those employed by state intelligence services created uncomfortable questions about the actual ethical distinction being drawn. So Prometheus opposes intelligence agencies and their methods by becoming an intelligence agency and employing those same methods? she challenged, allowing her growing skepticism to emerge more directly. Marcus intervened for the first time. Since the formal disclosure began, his expression suggesting personal, rather than merely organizational investment in Rebecca's response. "The distinction isn't merely rhetorical, Karen," he stated, using her real name rather than operational identity, a significant departure from standard protocol in formal briefing environments. Prometheus utilizes certain methodologies similar to state actors, but our accountability structures and ultimate objectives create fundamental ethical differentiation. We don't serve institutional preservation or political interests. We serve systemic transformation toward greater justice and accountability. The personal nature of his response suggested genuine belief rather than merely organizational messaging. That Marcus himself accepted this ethical distinction despite his apparent background in precisely the state intelligence structures Prometheus claimed to oppose. This added another layer of complexity to Rebecca's assessment of both the organization and her longtime handler. "And who exactly holds Prometheus accountable?" she asked, directing the question to both Keller and Marcus. "If you operate globally, without state sponsorship or governmental oversight, what prevents the same corruption and abuse you claim to oppose?" The question appeared to strike a chord with both senior operatives, their exchange of glances suggesting this particular challenge represented familiar territory rather than unexpected resistance. Keller responded with what seemed practiced precision rather than spontaneous explanation. "Prometheus maintains internal accountability through distributed authority structures, operational review councils composed of representatives from different organizational divisions, and strict ethical frameworks governing all direct action operations," Keller explained. "No single individual or faction possesses unilateral decision authority for significant operational initiatives. Multiple levels of review and approval ensure balanced assessment of both tactical execution and strategic alignment with core objectives." The explanation described formal accountability mechanisms that sounded reasonable in theoretical terms. Yet Rebecca noted the absence of any external oversight or truly independent review capability. The accountability Keller described remained entirely internal to an organization that operated in complete secrecy outside recognized legal frameworks. "So Prometheus is accountable to Prometheus," Rebecca summarized, the skepticism evident in her tone despite continued professional demeanor. "That's precisely the closed system accountability model that enables the institutional abuses you claim to oppose." Marcus shifted slightly, his expression suggesting this particular challenge carried personal significance beyond organizational defense. "The fundamental difference lies in purpose and incentive structure," he countered. "Traditional institutions protect power and privilege, creating inherent incentives for corruption and abuse. Prometheus exists specifically to confront those patterns, creating operational alignment between our methods and ethical objectives." The response carried philosophical conviction while effectively sidestepping the practical accountability question Rebecca had raised. This pattern of ethical justification, based on claimed purpose rather than actual oversight mechanisms, reinforced her growing concern about Prometheus's true nature, despite its appealing ideological framing. "I need time to process this," she stated, recognizing that continued immediate questioning would likely produce similar justification patterns rather than substantively new information. "The gap between what I believed I was serving for 3 years and what you're now describing as Prometheus's actual nature and capabilities requires careful consideration rather than immediate response." Keller nodded, appearing neither surprised nor concerned by this reaction. "Of course. Cognitive integration of expanded organizational understanding typically requires processing time. Comfortable quarters have been prepared for your use during this assessment period. Security protocols remain in effect, given the active British response to your extraction, but otherwise your movement within designated facility areas is unrestricted." The response carried the clinical precision of someone accustomed to managing personnel transitions rather than merely providing operational briefings. This further confirmed Prometheus's highly structured nature and sophisticated personnel management processes, more consistent with intelligence agency practices than revolutionary movement approaches. "And what happens to the priority alpha?" Investigation regarding the Buckingham Palace intelligence failure while I'm processing this disclosure? Rebecca asked, focusing on practical operational matters rather than the broader philosophical questions raised by Prometheus's actual nature. My perspective on that compromise might be valuable given my direct experience with both the operation and subsequent interrogation. Your insights would indeed be valuable, Keller acknowledged with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than merely procedural response. Once you've had sufficient time to integrate this disclosure, a formal debrief regarding both the operational compromise and your interrogation experience will be scheduled. That information will feed directly into the ongoing investigation. The willingness to incorporate her perspective suggested at least the possibility of genuine concern about the intelligence failure, rather than merely creating the appearance of investigation. Rebecca noted this potential positive indicator while maintaining her overall analytical caution about Prometheus's true nature and objectives. How long will I be permitted for this cognitive integration before a decision is expected? She asked, testing the parameters of the apparent choice being offered regarding her continued involvement. Standard protocol allows 72 hours for initial processing of expanded organizational disclosure, Marcus replied, apparently more familiar with specific procedural timelines than Keller, despite her apparently more senior position. That window can be extended based on individual requirements and assessment of psychological integration progress. The reference to standardized protocols and psychological assessment further confirmed Prometheus's sophisticated and formalized nature, suggesting Rebecca was not the first operative to receive this type of disclosure after initial compartmentalized service. This pattern of graduated revelation raised questions about how many other agents had experienced similar transitions from limited to expanded organizational understanding. And during that 72 hours, what operational security measures will be in place regarding my status? She inquired, maintaining focus on practical security considerations rather than the philosophical implications of Prometheus's revealed nature. Full protective protocols remain active, Keller assured her. This facility maintains comprehensive security measures including electromagnetic isolation, physical perimeter defense, aerial surveillance countermeasures, and specialized counterintelligence systems. Your presence here is unknown to British authorities or intelligence services, with multiple deception measures implemented to suggest alternative extraction vectors and destinations. The sophisticated security measures described represented yet another confirmation of Prometheus's advanced capabilities and resources, far beyond what a typical revolutionary organization could field without significant state-level support or funding. This raised further questions about the organization's actual backing and connections despite its claimed non-state independence. Very well, Rebecca acknowledged, recognizing that continued questioning in this initial disclosure session would likely yield diminishing returns in terms of substantive new information. I'll take the offered 72 hours to consider what I've learned and determine my response. Excellent, Keller responded with professional satisfaction rather than personal relief. Director Headley will escort you to your assigned quarters and ensure you have all necessary resources during your assessment period. Communications capabilities for any requirements will be provided, though external connectivity remains restricted for obvious security considerations. The formal conclusion of the disclosure briefing carried the procedural efficiency Rebecca had observed throughout her contact with Keller, suggesting someone thoroughly accustomed to management protocols rather than merely operational direction. This further reinforced her assessment of Prometheus as a highly structured organization with defined hierarchies and processes despite its revolutionary philosophical framing. Marcus guided Rebecca from the conference facility through additional security checkpoints to a residential section of the underground complex. The accommodations proved surprisingly comfortable. A well-appointed suite including sleeping area, workspace, and private bathroom facilities, all designed with both functional utility and reasonable comfort in consideration. These will be your quarters during the assessment period, he explained, his tone shifting from the formal briefing mode of the disclosure session to the more personally engaged manner that had characterized their operational relationship. The communication system beside the workstation connects directly to facility services for any requirements, meals, information access, medical support if needed. My private channel is also programmed if you have questions or wish to discuss aspects of the disclosure further. The offer of personal availability suggested Marcus recognized the potentially destabilizing impact of the revelations Rebecca had received. This apparent personal concern contrasted with the procedural efficiency that had dominated the formal disclosure, hinting at the complex operational relationship they had developed over 3 years, despite the compartmentalization and controlled information he had maintained. "I appreciate that," Rebecca acknowledged, maintaining professional composure despite the internal turmoil the disclosure had generated. "Though I expect I'll need some time to process this independently before further discussion would be productive." Marcus nodded, his expression suggesting understanding of both her stated need for processing time and the unspoken reassessment of trust that would necessarily accompany it. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. The only scheduled requirement during the 72-hour window is a daily medical assessment, standard protocol for post-extraction monitoring, particularly following detention by hostile services." The continued reference to standardized protocols reinforced Rebecca's growing understanding that her experience represented established organizational procedure rather than exceptional handling. This pattern recognition provided valuable context for assessing the broader nature of Prometheus beyond the specific revelations of the disclosure briefing. "I'll be available when you're ready," Marcus added as he prepared to depart, his tone carrying what appeared to be genuine personal concern beneath the professional operational demeanor. The transition from compartmentalized to expanded organizational understanding is significant. Integration support is available if needed. With that final offer of assistance, he left Rebecca alone in the assigned quarters. The automatic security systems engaging with subtle efficiency as the door closed behind him. For the first time since her failed attack on Sergeant Blake at Buckingham Palace, she found herself in genuine privacy rather than merely operational isolation. The realization prompted both physical and mental relaxation of the professional discipline she had maintained throughout capture, interrogation, extraction, and disclosure. Rebecca moved to the sleeping area and sat on the edge of the bed, allowing her body to release the operational tension while her mind began systematically processing the extraordinary revelations of the past several hours. Prometheus was not the revolutionary movement she had believed she was serving for 3 years. The organization she had committed to after Yemen was something far more sophisticated, structured, and potentially problematic. A shadow intelligence agency with global reach, advanced technological capabilities, and apparent resources comparable to state-level actors despite its claimed independence from governmental authority. Marcus was not merely the revolutionary operative and mentor she had understood him to be, but a former British military intelligence officer, now serving as regional operations director for Western Europe within a formal organizational hierarchy she had never been informed about. Their relationship had been characterized by deliberate compartmentalization and controlled disclosure rather than the partnership of shared purpose she had believed defined their work together. The Buckingham Palace operation had not been the straightforward demonstration of institutional vulnerability she had been briefed to execute, but a multi-layered operation with concurrent elements she hadn't been informed about, using her visible action as cover for more sophisticated intelligence collection and cyber penetration objectives carried out by separate teams with different operational awareness. Each of these revelations carried profound implications for her understanding of both her past actions and future choices. Had she been fighting against corrupt power structures as she believed, or simply serving a different kind of power structure with more appealing philosophical justification? Had her disillusionment after Yemen been recognized and exploited, rather than genuinely addressed through meaningful alternative service? The questions multiplied as she continued processing the disclosure information against her previous understanding and operational experience. The apparent sophistication, resources, and global reach of Prometheus raised obvious questions about its actual backing and support, despite claims of non-state independence. The formal hierarchies and specialized divisions suggested organizational evolution far beyond revolutionary origins, regardless of continued philosophical framing around justice and accountability. Most significantly, the methodologies and capabilities revealed, memory suppression techniques, sophisticated surveillance and counter-surveillance systems, global operational capacity, appeared functionally identical to the intelligence agencies and power structures Prometheus claimed to oppose. The distinction offered rested entirely on claimed purpose and internal accountability, rather than fundamental differences in approach or capability. As Rebecca continued this analytical assessment, she simultaneously conducted thorough examination of her assigned quarters, professional paranoia asserting itself despite physical exhaustion and emotional strain. The search revealed no obvious surveillance devices, though she recognized that an organization with Prometheus's apparent technological capabilities would likely employ monitoring systems beyond her detection capacity if they chose to. This realization reinforced a crucial aspect of her current situation. Whatever genuine choice Prometheus offered regarding her continued involvement following this disclosure, they retained complete operational control over her immediate circumstances. She remained in their facility, subject to their security protocols, with no independent communication capability or external contact options. The power dynamic was unmistakable, despite the respectful treatment and apparent freedom of choice. Prometheus controlled the environment, information access, and all practical aspects of her current existence. Whatever decision she made regarding continued service would occur within parameters they established and controlled, a fact that carried obvious implications for genuine versus merely apparent agency in her choice. As evening approached, Rebecca utilized the communication system to request meal service, both addressing physical needs and testing response protocols to better understand facility operations. The efficiency of service delivery and professional demeanor of the staff member who brought the meal confirmed her assessment of a highly structured organization with specialized personnel rather than revolutionary volunteers or ideological recruits. She ate methodically despite limited appetite, recognizing the importance of maintaining physical condition regardless of psychological stress or operational uncertainty. The meal itself further confirmed Prometheus's resources, quality ingredients professionally prepared, suggesting logistical capabilities and personnel support well beyond typical revolutionary organization limitations. After eating, Rebecca conducted basic physical conditioning exercises using the limited space of her quarters to maintain operational readiness through established routines that helped center both body and mind despite circumstances. The familiar patterns provided psychological grounding amid the destabilizing revelations and uncertain future she now faced. Sleep came in fitful intervals despite physical exhaustion, her trained mind continuing to process implications and assess options even during periods of apparent rest. Dreams fragmented between memories of Yemen, operational flashpoints from her 3 years with Prometheus, and the moment of failure at Buckingham Palace when Blake had moved with impossible speed to counter her attack. Morning arrived with artificial abruptness, lighting systems activating on what appeared to be programmed schedule rather than natural daylight progression. This environmental control represented another subtle reminder of her contained circumstances despite comfortable accommodation and respectful treatment. Rebecca resumed physical conditioning with greater intensity, using exercise to both prepare her body for whatever might come next and focus her mind on practical assessment rather than merely philosophical questioning. The methodical movement patterns provided clarity that helped crystallize her fundamental questions about both Prometheus and her own role within it. The promised medical assessment arrived mid-morning, a female physician with the professional demeanor of trained medical personnel rather than operational staff. The examination was thorough but respectful, focusing on physical condition and potential after-effects of detention rather than psychological assessment or security evaluation. Your physical condition is excellent, despite recent operational stress, the physician concluded after completing standard diagnostic procedures. No indicators of chemical interrogation compounds, physical trauma within normal parameters for standard detention protocols rather than enhanced measures. Recommend continued hydration and standard nutrition supplementation, but no medical limitations on operational readiness. The assessment's focus on operational readiness, rather than merely general health status, confirmed Rebecca's understanding that Prometheus anticipated potential redeployment despite the apparent freedom of choice regarding her continued involvement. This suggested organizational expectation, or at least preference for her continued service following the disclosure period. And psychological assessment? Rebecca inquired. testing the boundaries of the medical evaluation, and potentially gaining insight into Prometheus's monitoring of her response to the disclosure. "Not within my current tasking parameters," the physician replied with professional precision that suggested clear role definition rather than merely personal boundary setting. Psychological assessment following expanded organizational disclosure follows separate protocol timeline, typically scheduled after the 72-hour integration period if the operative chooses continued service. The response confirmed both standardized protocols for this type of disclosure situation and the apparent reality of genuine choice regarding continued involvement. The reference to assessment, if the operative chooses continued service, suggested alternative processing for those who declined further involvement, presumably including the memory suppression techniques Keller had referenced. After the physician departed, Rebecca returned to systematic assessment of both her situation and the broader implications of what she had learned about Prometheus. The organization's actual nature presented both ethical and practical challenges to her continued involvement, despite its appealing philosophical framing and apparent operational effectiveness. If Prometheus utilized methods and capabilities functionally identical to the intelligence agencies and power structures it claimed to oppose, could its activities truly represent meaningful resistance rather than merely parallel operations with different claimed justification? If accountability remained entirely internal to the organization itself, what prevented the same patterns of abuse and corruption it purported to fight against? Yet the alternative, separation from Prometheus with memory suppression techniques and identity reconstruction, carried its own disturbing implications. Setting aside the ethical questions about such methods, the practical reality would mean surrendering whatever agency she had built over the past 3 years and potentially losing critical aspects of her own identity and experience. The hours passed in continued assessment and periodic physical maintenance as Rebecca worked through implications and options with the analytical discipline that had characterized her professional approach throughout her intelligence career. By evening, she had reached preliminary conclusions about both Prometheus's actual nature and her own potential place within it, though questions remained that would require additional information before final determination could be made. When the communication system indicated an incoming contact request from Marcus's private channel, she accepted the connection after brief consideration, recognizing that additional perspective might clarify certain aspects of her assessment despite her lingering questions about his role in the compartmentalization she had experienced. "Karen?" His voice came through the system with the clarity of advanced communication technology. "I'm checking if you require anything additional during your integration period. Resources, information access, or discussion opportunity if that would be helpful at this stage." The offer carried what appeared to be genuine concern beneath the professional operational framing. Rebecca considered her response carefully, balancing the value of additional information against maintaining independent assessment capability during this critical consideration period. "I appreciate the check-in," she acknowledged, maintaining professional tone despite the personal nature of her current deliberations. "I do have some specific questions that might help clarify aspects of what Director Keller disclosed. Would you be available for direct conversation rather than system communication?" "Of course," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I can come to your quarters now if that timing works for your process." The immediate availability suggested either proximity within the facility or prioritization of her integration process within his operational responsibilities. Either interpretation indicated the significance Prometheus placed on her response to the disclosure, whether from genuine concern for her as a valued operative or merely organizational interest in retaining her capabilities. "Now would be fine," Rebecca confirmed, preparing mentally for the conversation that might help determine her future relationship with both Marcus and Prometheus itself. When he arrived approximately 10 minutes later, Rebecca noted subtle changes in his demeanor compared to their last interaction. Less formal operational direction, more personal engagement, suggesting recognition of the changed relationship dynamic following the expanded organizational disclosure. "How are you processing the disclosure?" he asked once they were seated in the work area of her quarters, his tone carrying what appeared to be genuine interest rather than merely procedural inquiry. "It's a significant cognitive adjustment," Rebecca acknowledged, maintaining analytical precision while allowing some indication of the personal impact these revelations carried. "Learning that the organization I believed I was serving for 3 years bears limited resemblance to what I've now been shown as Prometheus's actual nature and structure." Marcus nodded, his expression suggesting understanding of this reaction from both professional assessment and perhaps personal experience. The transition from compartmentalized to expanded organizational understanding is deliberately managed, precisely because of that adjustment requirement. The revolutionary framework provided during your recruitment and initial operational phase matched both your psychological needs after Yemen and the specific type of purpose you were seeking. The explanation confirmed what Rebecca had already concluded, that her idealism and disillusionment had been recognized and deliberately channeled rather than genuinely addressed through meaningful alternative service. This raised fundamental questions about agency and manipulation, despite the valuable work she believed she had accomplished during her Prometheus involvement. "So I was profiled and managed, rather than merely recruited and deployed," she summarized, allowing a hint of the underlying anger this realization generated to color her tone. "My psychological state after Yemen was assessed, and a tailor-made narrative provided to ensure my cooperation and commitment." Marcus appeared to consider his response carefully, suggesting recognition of the critical nature of this particular aspect of their conversation for her continued involvement decision. "Your experience and psychological profile were indeed thoroughly assessed during recruitment consideration," he acknowledged with unusual directness. "The revolutionary framework was determined most appropriate for your specific background and motivational requirements, but that doesn't mean the work itself was deceptive or the impact less meaningful." The partial acknowledgement confirmed Rebecca's assessment, while attempting to preserve legitimacy for the operational work she had conducted despite the manipulated context. This represented a significant moment of transparency compared to their previous interactions, suggesting Marcus recognized the need for greater honesty given her current decision point. "And what about your role in that manipulation?" she asked, addressing the personal aspect of their operational relationship that carried particular weight given the trust she had placed in him over 3 years. "Was our entire working relationship simply calculated management of a psychological asset rather than the partnership in meaningful resistance I believed it to be?" The directness of the question appeared to impact Marcus more significantly than professional operational discussions typically did, his expression suggesting genuine emotional engagement rather than merely tactical calculation. "The operational relationship was managed according to organizational protocols for compartmentalized assets," he stated after visible consideration, maintaining professional framing while acknowledging the managed nature of their interaction. "But the personal elements of our working partnership, the trust, the shared commitment to meaningful impact, the recognition of your exceptional capabilities, those aspects were genuine despite the controlled disclosure limitations." The response attempted to separate professional management from personal connection, suggesting their relationship contained both calculated handling and genuine respect, despite the comprehensive compartmentalization she had experienced. Whether this distinction represented meaningful differentiation or merely sophisticated justification remained unclear despite his apparent sincerity. "And now?" Rebecca asked, focusing on the immediate implications rather than historical context. "What changes if I choose to continue involvement with Prometheus given this expanded understanding of its actual nature and structure?" "Everything, and nothing," Marcus replied, the paradoxical response carrying what appeared to be genuine reflection rather than merely calculated effect. "Operationally, your capabilities would be deployed within expanded awareness of organizational objectives and strategic context, potentially increasing both effectiveness and personal agency through comprehensive understanding rather than compartmentalized direction. Yet the fundamental purpose remains consistent with what you believed you were serving, confronting corrupt power structures and institutional abuse, just through more sophisticated means and within broader strategic framework than previously disclosed." The explanation offered a vision of continued service with enhanced understanding and potentially increased agency, framing expanded organizational disclosure as opportunity rather than merely revelation of previous deception. This perspective aligned with Keller's presentation during the formal briefing, while adding personal dimension through Marcus's evident investment in Rebecca's continued involvement. "And if I determine that Prometheus's actual nature conflicts too significantly with what I believed I was serving?" she asked, testing his personal reaction to this possibility beyond the organizational separation protocols Keller had outlined. Marcus's expression shifted subtly, suggestion of genuine concern rather than merely professional assessment. Then standard separation protocols would be implemented as Director Keller described, but that outcome would represent significant loss, both for Prometheus operationally and... He hesitated briefly before continuing with unusual personal disclosure, and for me personally, given our working relationship over the past 3 years. The acknowledgement of personal investment beyond operational value represented rare emotional transparency from someone who had maintained professional distance throughout their working relationship. This glimpse of genuine connection, despite the controlled management she had experienced, added yet another layer of complexity to Rebecca's assessment of both Marcus himself and her potential future with Prometheus. "I need to understand more about the Priority Alpha investigation regarding Buckingham Palace," she stated, shifting focus from personal relationship dynamics to the operational failure that had precipitated this expanded disclosure. "If I'm to make an informed decision about continued involvement, I need clarity on whether I was knowingly deployed into a compromised operation, regardless of who made that decision or why." Marcus nodded, appearing to accept the legitimacy of this specific requirement despite potential operational security implications. The current investigative assessment strongly indicates counterintelligence penetration rather than deliberate compromise decision. He stated with careful precision that suggested factual reporting rather than merely reassurance effort. Technical analysis of planning systems and communication protocols has identified sophisticated intrusion signatures consistent with specialized state-level capabilities rather than standard intelligence service methodologies. The specific technical details suggested genuine investigative findings rather than merely procedural response to her concern. This represented potentially valuable confirmation that her operational security had been compromised by external actors, rather than internal Prometheus decision-making, though questions remained about how such penetration had occurred, given the organization's apparent sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities. Which state-level actor would have both motivation to target Prometheus operations and specific knowledge about my deployment parameters, she asked, pursuing the logical extension of this explanation. Current assessment indicates Russian military intelligence as primary suspect. Marcus replied after brief consideration that suggested calculating appropriate disclosure levels rather than uncertainty about investigative findings. Their specialized cyber penetration capabilities match the intrusion signatures identified, and recent Prometheus operations in Eastern Europe created specific motivation for targeting our Western European operational planning systems. The identification of Russian military intelligence as the suspected penetration source carried credibility given both technical capabilities and geopolitical motivations. This explanation aligned with standard intelligence community assessment of Russian operational methodologies while providing plausible rationale for specific targeting of Prometheus planning systems related to the Buckingham Palace operation. And how does an organization with Prometheus's apparent resources and capabilities suffer penetration by external intelligence services if its security protocols are as sophisticated as Director Keller suggested? Rebecca asked, identifying the logical inconsistency in this explanation despite its general plausibility. Marcus nodded slightly, suggesting respect for her analytical perception rather than discomfort with the challenge. No security system is impenetrable given sufficient resources and determination, he stated, offering standard security assessment rather than specific organizational defense. The investigation has identified specific vulnerability exploitation involving human intelligence compromise rather than merely technical penetration, suggesting targeted recruitment of peripheral support personnel with systems access rather than direct penetration of core security protocols. The explanation provided technically credible clarification while maintaining Prometheus's general security reputation through emphasis on human rather than system vulnerability. This represented plausible security assessment rather than merely defensive justification, increasing the potential credibility of the overall explanation regarding the Buckingham Palace compromise. So my operational security was compromised through human intelligence penetration rather than technical vulnerability or deliberate organizational decision, Rebecca summarized, testing her understanding of the explanation provided. Russian military intelligence recruited someone with access to planning systems related to the Buckingham Palace operation, enabling them to provide specific intelligence to British authorities regarding my deployment parameters and target selection. That's the current investigative assessment, Marcus confirmed, his tone suggesting professional analysis rather than merely convenient explanation. The investigation continues with priority alpha resources to identify both the specific compromise source and any additional penetration vectors that might threaten other operational elements. The response maintained consistency with previous explanations while acknowledging ongoing investigative requirements rather than claiming complete resolution. This balanced approach enhanced credibility compared to more definitive claims given the complexity of counterintelligence assessment in such scenarios. And Sergeant Blake's specific knowledge about the organization's symbol from Afghanistan, Rebecca pressed, focusing on the most personal aspect of the operational compromise she had experienced. His direct statement that his unit had encountered Prometheus operatives in Helmand province with fatal results. Sergeant Blake's operational history in Afghanistan occurred during early Prometheus development phases, Marcus explained, after visible consideration suggesting this specific information carried particular sensitivity. Before current organizational structures and protocols were fully established, a regional cell operating with greater autonomy than current methodologies permit engaged British Special Forces in Helmand province in 2011. That cell was neutralized, but apparently Blake retained specific recognition capability regarding organizational identifiers despite transitioning to ceremonial duties. The explanation acknowledged historical operational reality while suggesting evolution in organizational methods and controls, framing the Afghanistan incident as predating current Prometheus operational protocols rather than representing ongoing methodology. This provided context for Blake's specific knowledge while maintaining the broader narrative of organizational legitimacy and controlled operational approaches. So Prometheus has been active for at least 11 years, evolving from autonomous regional cells to the current hierarchical structure, Rebecca observed, adding this historical context to her developing understanding of the organization. That timeline suggests significant organizational development beyond what I was led to understand during recruitment and operational deployment. Prometheus has existed in various forms for considerably longer than your involvement, Marcus confirmed, apparently recognizing that continued compartmentalization served little purpose given the expanded disclosure already provided. The organization has evolved through multiple developmental phases as both strategic objectives and operational methodologies matured. Current structures represent significant advancement from earlier cell-based models in both effectiveness and accountability mechanisms. This historical context provided valuable perspective for assessing Prometheus's actual nature beyond the immediate operational revelations of the disclosure briefing. The evolutionary narrative suggested organizational learning and adaptation rather than merely deceptive presentation, potentially supporting Marcus's assertion that current operations maintained ethical distinction from state intelligence services, despite methodological similarities. And my potential role if I choose continued involvement following this disclosure? Rebecca asked, focusing on practical implications rather than merely organizational history. What specific operational utilization would Prometheus envision given my capabilities and now expanded understanding? Your analytical capabilities and operational experience would qualify you for enhanced role within European Operations Division, Marcus replied, shifting to more concrete discussion of potential future involvement. Level 3 clearance would provide comprehensive operational context previously unavailable, enabling both strategic input and tactical execution with full awareness of broader objectives rather than compartmentalized tasking. The outlined role suggested meaningful enhancement of operational agency compared to her previous compartmentalized deployment. offering potential for genuine contribution beyond merely executing assigned tasks with limited understanding. This represented substantive change in relationship dynamic rather than merely cosmetic adjustment following expanded disclosure. And what assurance would I have that this enhanced role actually means what you're suggesting, rather than merely representing another level of managed perception? Rebecca challenged, the fundamental trust question underlying all other considerations about potential continued involvement. Marcus's expression suggested recognition of the legitimate nature of this challenge, given her experience of compartmentalization and controlled disclosure throughout their previous operational relationship. His response came after visible consideration that indicated personal rather than merely procedural engagement with the question. Trust requires verification capacity, he acknowledged with unusual directness. Level 3 clearance includes access to operational planning databases, strategic assessment resources, and cross-divisional information networks previously unavailable to you. These access capabilities would provide independent verification mechanisms rather than merely relying on information provided through operational briefings. The specific description of verification capabilities, rather than merely philosophical reassurance, represented meaningful engagement with her trust concerns. The outlined access would indeed provide mechanisms for independent assessment beyond merely accepting provided operational context, suggesting potential for genuine agency enhancement rather than simply another layer of managed perception. Need the remaining integration period to consider everything we've discussed, Rebecca stated, recognizing the need for independent reflection despite the valuable additional context Marcus had provided. The decision regarding continued involvement with Prometheus requires careful assessment of both organizational reality and my own ethical parameters. Of course, Marcus acknowledged, rising from his seat with evident respect for her processing requirements rather than pressure for immediate determination. The full 72-hour window remains available, with extension if needed. My channel remains open if additional questions arise during your consideration. As he prepared to depart, Rebecca noted subtle indicators of personal investment beneath his professional demeanor, suggesting genuine concern about her potential decision beyond merely organizational resource management. This human dimension added yet another layer of complexity to her assessment process, the personal connection with Marcus representing one of few consistent elements between her previous understanding and current organizational reality. Thank you for the additional context, she offered as professional acknowledgement of the valuable information provided, despite her continued deliberation regarding its implications. It helps clarify certain aspects of both the disclosure and my potential place within Prometheus moving forward. Marcus nodded, his expression suggesting appreciation for her continued analytical engagement rather than emotional reaction, despite the personal significance of their conversation. Integration of expanded organizational understanding requires both information input and independent processing. Both are essential for genuine choice rather than merely directed response. With that philosophical observation that seemed to acknowledge the importance of her agency in this decision, he departed, leaving Rebecca alone with both additional context and escalated complexity in her assessment of Prometheus and her potential future within it. The remaining hours of her 72-hour integration period passed in systematic consideration of everything she had learned, both from the formal disclosure briefing with Director Keller and the more personally engaged conversation with Marcus. The emerging picture of Prometheus carried both disturbing implications regarding her previous understanding and potential opportunity for meaningful service with enhanced awareness moving forward. The organization she had served for 3 years was indeed not the revolutionary movement she had believed it to be, operating instead as a sophisticated non-state intelligence agency with global reach, hierarchical structure, and methodologies functionally similar to the institutional powers it claimed to oppose. Her understanding had been deliberately managed through compartmentalization and controlled disclosure. Her psychological needs after Yemen recognized and channeled rather than genuinely addressed through transparent engagement. Yet the fundamental purpose Marcus had described throughout their operational relationship appeared to maintain consistency despite the organizational deception, confronting corrupt power structures and institutional abuse, exposing vulnerability, enforcing accountability where traditional oversight mechanisms failed. If this core mission remained valid, despite the sophisticated methods and complex structures now revealed, perhaps meaningful service remained possible with expanded understanding rather than compartmentalized deployment. The Buckingham Palace. Failure had indeed resulted from external compromise rather than deliberate sacrifice, according to available evidence. Russian military intelligence penetration of planning systems through human intelligence recruitment rather than intentional exposure by Prometheus leadership. While questions remained about how such penetration had occurred given the organization's apparent sophisticated capabilities, the explanation carried technical credibility and logical consistency beyond merely convenient justification. Most significantly, the potential for enhanced operational role with Level 3 clearance offered verification capabilities beyond merely accepting provided context, access to planning databases, strategic assessment resources, and cross-divisional information that would enable independent evaluation rather than reliance on controlled briefing information. This verification capacity represented essential foundation for rebuilt trust following the revelation of comprehensive compartmentalization throughout her previous involvement. By the conclusion of the 72-hour integration period, Rebecca had reached preliminary determination regarding her response to the expanded organizational disclosure. While ethical questions remained about Prometheus's methods and accountability mechanisms, the potential for meaningful service with enhanced understanding and verification capability offered superior alternative to separation protocols with their disturbing implications for both agency and identity preservation. When the communication system indicated Marcus was requesting contact as the formal integration period concluded, Rebecca accepted the connection with clear determination, rather than continued deliberation. The 72-hour integration period has concluded. His voice came through with professional precision that suggested formal protocol activation rather than merely personal inquiry. Have you reached determination regarding continued involvement following expanded organizational disclosure? I have, Rebecca confirmed, matching his professional tone despite the personal significance of her decision. I choose continued involvement with enhanced operational role and Level 3 clearance as described, with specific condition that verification capabilities through independent information access be implemented immediately rather than gradually, as standard protocols might suggest. The specific condition represented assertion of agency beyond merely accepting offered terms, establishing clear expectation regarding verification capacity as prerequisite for rebuilt trust rather than merely hopeful assumption about future implementation. Condition accepted. Marcus responded without hesitation or apparent need for higher authorization, suggesting either predetermined approval for reasonable requests or specific discretional authority regarding her particular case. Verification. Access implementation will begin immediately upon transfer to operational facility. Transport preparations are already underway based on integration period conclusion. The immediate accommodation of her condition and revelation of already initiated transport preparations suggested both the value Prometheus placed on her continued involvement and the expectation they had maintained regarding her likely determination. This organizational confidence carried both affirming and unsettling implications depending on interpretation, either appreciation of her capabilities and alignment, or sophisticated prediction of her psychological response patterns regardless of genuine choice provision. When do we depart? Rebecca asked, focusing on immediate operational parameters rather than philosophical implications of organizational expectation patterns. 2 hours, Marcus replied with characteristic precision. Secure transport to Regional Operations Center in Central Europe, where formal integration protocols and enhanced clearance implementation will be completed. Estimated transit time approximately 4 hours, including security measures and route diversification. The specific timeline and destination information represented immediate implementation of more transparent operational communication compared to her previous compartmentalized briefings, a positive indicator regarding potential fulfillment of her condition for verification capability through enhanced information access. I'll prepare for transport, she acknowledged, the familiar operational focus providing grounding amid the philosophical complexity of her situation. Whatever ethical questions remained about Prometheus's actual nature and her place within it, the practical requirements of immediate movement provided concrete focus beyond abstract consideration. "Thank you, Karen," Marcus responded, his tone shifting from formal operational protocol to more personal engagement. "Your continued involvement represents significant organizational value, but also—" He paused briefly before continuing with unusual emotional transparency. "Also personal affirmation of the work we've done together, despite the compartmentalization limitations that existed until now." The acknowledgement of both organizational and personal significance suggested genuine investment beyond merely professional resource management, one of few consistent elements between her previous understanding and current organizational reality. This human dimension amidst institutional complexity offered potential anchor point for navigating the transformed relationship with both Marcus and Prometheus moving forward. "The expanded understanding changes everything and nothing," Rebecca observed, echoing his earlier paradoxical framing with newly personal significance. "The operational reality differs significantly from what I believed I was serving. Yet the fundamental purpose remains worth pursuing if verification confirms alignment between stated objectives and actual methodologies. Trust through verification, rather than merely assurance," Marcus acknowledged, recognizing the essential foundation she required for rebuilt operational relationship, "as it should be given what you've learned about previous compartmentalization. Level 3 access will provide that verification capacity as foundation for whatever comes next." As Rebecca prepared for transport following their conversation, she recognized the complex mixture of resolution and uncertainty her decision represented. She had chosen continued involvement with Prometheus despite the significant gap between previous understanding and current organizational reality, accepting enhanced role with expanded awareness and verification capability as superior alternative to separation protocols with their troubling implications for both agency and identity. Yet questions remained about Prometheus's actual nature, accountability mechanisms, and ethical distinction from the Prometheus Regional Operations Center in Central Europe proved significantly more extensive than Rebecca had anticipated. A sophisticated underground complex built into a remote mountainside with architectural features suggesting former military installation repurposed for the organization's specialized requirements. As their transport vehicle descended through multiple security checkpoints into the heart of the facility, she cataloged details that further confirmed Prometheus's resources and capabilities extended far beyond what even the disclosure briefing had suggested. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Marcus stated as they reached the central hub of the facility. European Operations Command and primary strategic coordination center for Prometheus activities across the continent. The name carried both literal and symbolic significance, suggesting not merely secure facility, but philosophical safe haven for the organization's claimed purpose of confronting corrupt power structures. Rebecca noted this deliberate symbolic framing while maintaining analytical assessment of the operational reality it represented. "The scale is impressive," she observed, watching as dozens of personnel moved with professional purpose through specialized work areas surrounding the central command hub. "This suggests resources and infrastructure far beyond what your disclosure indicated." The disclosure provided conceptual framework rather than comprehensive inventory, Marcus acknowledged, guiding her through the facility with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with its layout and functions. Practical demonstration offers more effective understanding than merely descriptive enumeration. The rationalization for incomplete disclosure even during supposedly comprehensive briefing represented continued pattern of managed information provision despite her new status and clearance level. Rebecca noted this tendency while focusing on direct observation of the operational environment now available to her. The facility contained multiple specialized divisions, clearly visible even during this initial transit. Intelligence collection and analysis, operational planning, technical support, logistics management, and what appeared to be dedicated research and development sections with advanced equipment visible through transparent partitions. Personnel moved with